Victor Mercer slid the legal documents across the mahogany desk with 2 fingers, the way a man slides a tip he considers too generous. "Sign these," he said, "and the Bennett woman gets a settlement generous enough to disappear quietly. Don't sign them, and I will make sure every door in this city closes on her. Her lease, her job references, her daughter's preschool enrollment." He straightened his cufflinks. "You built something here, Adrian. Don't let sentiment burn it down." Adrian stared at his father's handwriting on the signature line, Adrian James Mercer, and said nothing. "If this story reaches your heart, please hit the like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." Now, let's go back to where it all began. The rain came sideways that night, not the soft, cinematic kind that makes Manhattan look romantic in photographs. This was the brutal November kind, cold enough to sting, heavy enough to blur the streetlights into orange smears, the kind of rain that soaks through a coat in 30 seconds and makes people question every decision that led them to be outside. Gutters ran like small rivers, umbrellas inverted and died on street corners. The city, usually indifferent to individual suffering, seemed actively hostile. Adrian Mercer's town car moved through it all without difficulty. That was the thing about money. It created a sealed environment. Climate-controlled leather interior, tinted windows, a driver named Marcus who had worked for the Mercer family for 11 years and knew better than to make conversation unless invited. The car smelled like cedar and the faint ghost of the scotch Adrian had been nursing at dinner. Outside, the storm was a documentary he was watching through glass. He was coming back from a dinner at a client's townhouse on the Upper East Side. A 3-hour performance of charm and careful conversation with a sovereign wealth fund manager who controlled more capital than most countries. Successful, technically. Adrian had secured a preliminary agreement that would close before the quarter ended and add another row of numbers to the spreadsheet his father reviewed every Monday morning. The kind of win that used to feel like something. Now it just felt like another dinner he'd have to recover from. "Take Lexington South," he told Marcus. "I want to stop by the office before we head back." "Of course, Mr. Mercer." At 41, Adrian had a face that read as authority rather than age. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that tended to make people look away first. The kind of posture you either inherited or acquired through years of rooms where weakness was expensive. He wore success the way some men wear cologne. You noticed it before you noticed anything else. The watch on his wrist cost more than most people's cars. He did not think about this often because thinking about it served no purpose. He was scrolling through the fund manager's follow-up email on his phone when Marcus slowed unexpectedly. "Construction detour, sir, taking us through Chelsea." Adrian didn't look up. Fine. It was the detour that did it. That particular block. That particular intersection. On that particular night. If the water main on Park hadn't burst, if the construction crew hadn't coned off 3 lanes, if Marcus had taken any other route through the storm, Adrian Mercer might have driven home to his penthouse apartment and poured another scotch and continued the life he had constructed with such deliberate precision. But Marcus turned onto 23rd Street, and Adrian looked up from his phone because the car slowed slightly, and through the rain-blurred window he saw a woman. She was standing under the narrow overhang of a closed dry-cleaning shop, pressing herself against the glass to avoid the worst of the sideways rain. In one arm she held a child, a small girl, maybe 2.5, 3 years old, wrapped in a puffy jacket that was visibly soaked through. The woman's coat was too thin for the temperature. She had no umbrella. Her hair was plastered flat against her face, and she was looking at her phone with an expression Adrian recognized in the way you recognize a sound from childhood. The expression of someone who has already made 3 phone calls that went unanswered and is deciding whether to make a 4th. She shifted the child's weight on her hip. The little girl, inexplicably, laughed at something. The rain, maybe, or the rivulet streaming off the overhang inches from her face. And the woman looked down at her, and something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite grief, but was the territory between them. Adrian knew that face. He knew the angle of those shoulders and the way she held her weight slightly to the left when she was tired, and the particular set of her jaw when she was refusing to show how close she was to the edge of something. "Marcus," his voice came out flat. "Stop the car." Her name was Claire Bennett. She had been Claire Mercer for 3 years, between the ages of 29 and 32, which now felt to her like a chapter in a book she'd read once and couldn't quite remember clearly. Not because the marriage had been terrible, and it hadn't been. Not in the ways people imagined when they heard billionaire divorce. There had been no infidelity, no dramatic betrayal, no single moment of rupture. There had been, instead, a slow accumulation of absences, missed dinners, trips extended by days without discussion. A husband who was physically present perhaps 40% of the time and emotionally present for considerably less. And then, 14 months in, the pregnancy, which Claire had greeted with terrified joy and Adrian had greeted with something she could only describe, later, and to no one, as a kind of closing down. He hadn't been cruel about it. That would have been easier to process. He'd been careful, deliberate. He'd sat across from her at their kitchen table, the good one, the one she'd picked out at an antique market in Brooklyn before any of this, and explained in the measured tone he used for difficult conversations with clients that he was not capable of being the father a child deserved, that the pattern would repeat, that his own childhood had demonstrated clearly what happened when a Mercer man tried to build a family and failed, that leaving now was, in his view, the responsible thing. Claire had stared at him for a long time after he finished talking. Then she said, "You're not leaving because you'll fail. You're leaving because you're afraid you won't get to decide what failure looks like." He hadn't had an answer for that, which she supposed was its own kind of answer. The divorce was handled by attorneys. Claire refused the penthouse. She took a settlement that covered a reasonable apartment in Chelsea and a cushion for the first year, and then she got a job doing project coordination for a nonprofit arts organization in Midtown, and she enrolled in the city's childcare subsidy program, and she built, with considerable difficulty and zero assistance from the Mercer family, a life that worked, mostly. By the standards of people who define working as continuing. Lily was born in April. Adrian was not there. That had been Claire's decision, not his. She hadn't called him, hadn't wanted him in that room as a spectator to something he'd already decided wasn't his. Lily had his eyes, though, dark, serious, watching. It occasionally made Claire's chest do something complicated. Tonight had been a series of small disasters stacked on top of each other. The subway had experienced a signal delay at 14th Street that turned a 20-minute commute into 50. The babysitter, a college student named Priya, who was generally reliable, had texted at 4:30 to say she had a fever and couldn't make it. Claire had collected Lily from the emergency backup daycare, the one that charged an extra $40 per late pickup, and was trying to get them both home before the storm got worse. She had called 2 car services. One canceled, the other gave her a 40-minute wait time. Her umbrella had snapped on the corner of 8th Avenue, so she stood under the overhang of a dry cleaner's that had closed 2 hours ago, her phone at 17% battery, her daughter damp and delighted, and she was trying to decide whether it made more practical sense to walk the 6 blocks home in the rain or wait for a car that might or might not show up. She was calculating this with the specific mathematical focus of a woman who had learned to make decisions based entirely on what was available rather than what she wanted, when a car stopped at the curb. Town car. Black. The window on the passenger side descended. She squinted through the rain, and the bottom fell out of her stomach. What? Adrian had stepped halfway out of the car before he thought about what he was doing. "Claire!" She stared at him. Her expression moved through several things quickly. Surprise, something that might have been involuntary relief, and then something that hardened over the top of both of those like water freezing over. "Adrian." He looked at the child on her hip. The little girl was looking at him with open, uncomplicated curiosity, the way very small children look at everything, without the social training that tells you staring is rude. She had his eyes. He'd been told this by his assistant who had seen a photograph, but being told a thing and seeing it in person were entirely different experiences, and he was not prepared for it. Something moved in his chest that he didn't have a name for, something structural. "Get in the car," he said. "Both of you. I'll have Marcus take you home." Claire's jaw tightened. "We're fine. You're soaked." "I know. We're fine." "Claire." He heard the controlled impatience in his own voice and understood, distantly, that it was the wrong register entirely. He adjusted. "Please, it's 42 degrees and she's wet." A pause. The rain continued making its argument. Lily, apparently bored with adult negotiations, reached out toward the falling water beyond the overhang, and said something that was almost a word. Claire closed her eyes briefly, and he watched her do the exact same calculation she had probably been running all evening. What is available versus what I want, and arrive at the only answer that made sense. Okay, she said, flat, not grateful, just practical. The inside of the car was warm and dry and smelled like leather and expensive cedar. Claire settled Lily on her lap and sat as close to the door as the seat allowed. Lily looked around the interior with frank delight, touching the stitching on the armrest, investigating the window controls until Claire moved her hand away. "Where on 23rd?" Marcus asked. "Between 9th and 10th, Claire said. "The building with the green awning." Of course. Adrian sat on his side of the back seat. The distance between them felt both too small and too large. He was trying to figure out what to do with his hands, which was not something that usually required thought. "How old is she?" he asked. He knew, technically. 29 months. He'd kept track in the abstract way of someone monitoring a situation rather than participating in it. Claire looked at him sideways. "You know how old she is." He didn't argue. Lily had found the small reading light above the seat and was toggling it on and off with enormous satisfaction. "What's her name?" he said quietly. Something flickered across Claire's face. "Lily." He nodded. He looked at his daughter. His daughter, a word he had trained himself not to apply to that reality for almost 3 years, turning the reading light on and off with the focused intensity of a scientist running an experiment. "She's..." He stopped. "She's what?" Claire's voice was careful. Not hostile, exactly. The voice of someone who has learned to treat fragile things with care even when they're not sure they deserve it. "She's okay," he said. "She looks okay. Healthy." Claire exhaled. "Yes, she's healthy." A beat. She had an ear infection in September that took 3 rounds of antibiotics to clear, and she's terrified of vacuum cleaners, and she only eats pasta if it's the spiral kind. But yes, healthy. The specificity of it hit him somewhere unguarded. The spiral pasta, the vacuum cleaners. These were the things you knew about a person when you were present for them, and he didn't know any of them, and the distance between those two facts felt suddenly very concrete. "Claire?" He didn't know what he was going to say after that. She turned to look at him. Her expression was tired in the specific way of someone who has been tired for a long time and made peace with it. "Don't," she said. "Not unkind, just clear. I'm not..." "I know what you're going to say, or some version of it, and tonight I don't have the capacity." She shifted Lily on her lap. "You gave us a ride. That was decent of you. Thank you." The car moved through the rain. Lily had stopped playing with the light and fallen into the drowsy stillness of a child approaching sleep, her head listing slightly against her mother's shoulder. Adrian looked out the window at the streaming streets. He was trying to identify the sensation that had been building in his chest since he saw Claire under that overhang, and he was arriving, slowly and with considerable resistance, at something he recognized as a kind of grief. Not for the marriage. That was older, more settled. This was something more specific. It was the reading light. On, off, on, off. The spiral pasta, the ear infection, 3 rounds of antibiotics. He had missed 29 months of a person becoming a person, and until 30 minutes ago he had managed to convince himself that this was a reasonable outcome of a reasonable decision. The building with the green awning appeared on the left. Marcus pulled to the curb. Claire was already organizing, shifting Lily's weight, reaching for the door handle, back to the fluid efficiency of a woman accustomed to managing everything with her hands full. "Wait," Adrian said. She paused. Lily stirred slightly, not waking. "Can I..." He stopped, tried again. "I know you don't want to hear this tonight. I know that's fair. But I would like to..." He realized, fumbling for words in a way that hadn't happened to him in years, possibly decades. He was very good at words. It was one of his primary professional tools. The fumbling was alarming and also felt somehow correct. "I would like to be in contact, not for any particular reason. Just, I'd like to know that she's okay." Claire studied him for a moment. Her expression was unreadable in the way that meant she was reading him very carefully. Knowing she's okay, she said slowly, is not the same as being present. I know. Do you? I'm starting to, he said. And he meant it in a way that scared him. Another pause. Lily made a small sound in her sleep. I'll think about it, Claire said finally. That's all I'll commit to. She got out of the car. She carried Lily toward the green awning, shifting the girl's weight with the practiced ease of someone who had done this thousands of times alone. And she didn't look back. Adrian sat in the parked car for a moment after the building door closed behind her. Home, Mr. Mercer? Marcus asked. He didn't answer right away. He was looking at the place where the little girl's damp boot print had pressed into the leather of the seat beside him. Yeah, he said. Home. He didn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. Adrian averaged 5.5 hours on a good night and had structured his entire life around the assumption that sleep was something other people did generously. He had supplements for alertness and a standing desk and a routine that squeezed productivity into the margins of insomnia. But tonight wasn't the usual wired brain business anxiety that kept him at his window watching the skyline. Tonight was different. He poured 2 fingers of scotch he didn't drink and stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass looking out at Manhattan. The storm had softened to a steady rain. Below him, the city moved in its permanent reduced traffic nighttime rhythm, taxis and delivery trucks, and the occasional cluster of people outside a bar. He thought about his father. Victor Mercer was 73 years old, still sharp in the ways that mattered to him, still commanding from the executive chair he had technically ceded to Adrian 4 years ago, but emotionally occupied at all times. Victor had built Mercer Capital Group from a small family office into one of the most influential investment firms on the East Coast. He had done this through an absolute clarity of purpose that brooked no distraction. Family was not a distraction to Victor, exactly. It was a management problem. You solved it with resources, good schools, adequate housing, staff, and you expected it to produce people who understood the value of what you'd built. Adrian's mother had left when he was 9. Not dramatically. She just slowly redirected herself toward a life in Connecticut that contained less of Victor and more of everything else. She visited at Christmas and birthdays and called sporadically, and Adrian had grown up understanding, without anyone saying it directly, that the Mercer household was not a place where love was the organizing principle. He had repeated the architecture almost exactly. He had told himself he'd done it consciously, preemptively, to spare a child the same experience. But Claire's words from 3 years ago were in his head tonight. You're not leaving because you'll fail. You're leaving because you're afraid you won't get to decide what failure looks like. He set down the untouched scotch. The reading light. On. Off. On. Lily hadn't been frightened of him. She'd looked at him with that open, assessing stare, the same one he'd apparently passed down to her genetically. And she'd filed him away in the category of interesting things in this unusual car and moved on to the next interesting thing. She didn't know enough to be afraid of him yet. He wasn't sure how to sit with that. He called his assistant at 7 the next morning. Diane, I need you to clear Thursday afternoon. You have a client call with the Singapore office at 3. Reschedule it. A pause. Diane had worked with him for 6 years and had developed, over that time, a highly calibrated set of responses to unexpected requests. This one apparently landed in the category of unusual but not alarming. Of course. Should I tell them a reason? Personal matter. They'll understand or they won't. All right. Anything else? He thought for a moment. Find me a good toy store in Chelsea, not a chain, an actual toy store. Another pause, slightly longer. For what age range? Around 3, a little girl. There was a silence that contained several things Diane was professionally committed to not saying. I'll send you options by noon, she said. He hung up and looked at his phone for a moment, then opened his contacts and found Claire's number. Still there. Moved to a folder labeled legal 3 years ago and never deleted. He stared at it. He put the phone down. Not yet. Showing up too quickly would read as impulse, and Claire had never responded well to impulse. She responded well to consistency, which he had historically been terrible at providing and was going to have to become something different about. He picked up his phone again, opened his email, and stared at the fund manager's follow-up from last night without reading it. Then he put it down and opened his contacts again and called Claire. It rang 4 times. Adrian. Her voice was cautious, not unfriendly. I was too vague last night, he said, when I said I wanted to be in contact. I want to be more specific. A beat. I'm listening. I'd like to meet for coffee. You, me, and Lily, if you're comfortable with that. In a public place, on your schedule, for as long or short as you want it to be. He paused. I know I don't have the standing to ask for more than that right now. Silence. He could hear, distantly, a children's show playing somewhere in her apartment, the sound of cartoon voices. I don't want Lily confused, Claire said finally. If you're doing this, you have to actually do it. I won't have her getting attached to someone who disappears again. I understand. I mean it, Adrian. You don't get to do this halfway. I know. Do you? She wasn't being rhetorical. She was genuinely asking. He thought about what the honest answer was. Not the reassuring answer, the honest one. I don't know how to do this at all, he said, but I think I have to try. And I think I'm capable of learning things I've decided I'm capable of learning. Another silence. The cartoon voices rose and fell. Saturday morning, Claire said. There's a coffee place on 22nd called Birch. 10 o'clock. If you're late or if you cancel, that's the end of it. I'll be there. Okay. She sounded tired and careful, and something underneath both of those things that he was not ready to name yet. See you Saturday. She hung up. He sat in his office, 31 floors above a rain-washed city that was slowly returning to its ordinary brightness, and felt the particular weight of something beginning that he couldn't control the outcome of, which was, he was beginning to understand, exactly the point. The building where his father ran the company's legacy investments was in Midtown, 12 blocks north. Adrian hadn't intended to go there that day, but found himself walking through the lobby at 2 in the afternoon, past the receptionist who had been there since before Adrian started showing up in this building, through the halls that smelled of mahogany and old money and the specific brand of authority that never needed to announce itself. Victor was on the phone when his assistant waved Adrian through. He held up a finger, 1 moment, and continued his call in the clipped tones he used for people who were wasting his time. Adrian waited. He'd spent considerable portions of his childhood waiting for his father to finish calls. He sat in the chair across the desk and looked at the framed photographs on the wall behind Victor. Deals, handshakes, the company's 40th anniversary gala. His father at 35, younger than Adrian was now, with a look of compressed ferocity that Adrian had once tried very hard to replicate and now sometimes saw in the mirror in ways that made him uncomfortable. Victor hung up. You look tired. I'm fine. You were out late. Dinner with the Singapore Fund? London partner. It went well. Victor nodded, filing this away. Then, something happened. It wasn't a question. Victor had spent 40 years reading rooms and people and the invisible signals that most missed. I saw Claire last night, Adrian said. Victor's expression didn't change exactly. It reorganized. Ah. And Lily. A pause. The name landed in the room with a particular weight. Adrian. Don't. He kept his voice even. I'm not asking your opinion. I'm telling you because you're going to find out regardless, and I'd rather you hear it from me. His father looked at him steadily. Victor Mercer at 73 was still a physically impressive man, large-framed, deliberate in his movements, with the contained energy of someone who had never stopped running the calculations. The Bennett woman is fine, I'm sure, Victor said. I don't have a problem with her specifically. What I have a problem with is the disruption. You know what's at stake with the current restructuring. Your attention needs to be, I'm going to meet them on Saturday. Victor stopped. Coffee, Adrian said. In Chelsea. I'm going to see my daughter. The words settled between them. Daughter. Adrian had not said it aloud to his father before. You made a decision, Victor said finally. A considered decision. You've honored it for almost 3 years. I made a decision I thought was protecting her. I've had occasion to reconsider whether it was actually protecting me. His father said nothing to that. I'm not asking for your support, Adrian said. I don't need it. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. He stood up. Adrian. Victor's voice had shifted slightly. Not softer exactly. Something else. a register Adrian couldn't quite read, which was unusual. I understand this feels urgent. I understand last night was... He paused, which was also unusual. Victor did not typically pause while looking for words. But consider what you're walking back into. The legal exposure, the expectations, She had an ear infection last September, Adrian said. It took 3 rounds of antibiotics to clear. I didn't know that until last night. I didn't know anything about her life because I decided from a distance that my absence was a form of protection. He looked at his father. I want to understand at what point in your career you came to the same conclusion about me, so I can figure out where I went wrong. The silence was long. Victor's jaw tightened. He looked away first, which Adrian would think about later because that almost never happened. Saturday, Adrian said. Coffee. I'll let you know how it goes. He left before his father could find the answer to a question neither of them had asked out loud. The toy store Diane found was on 7th Avenue. Small, wood-floored, smelling of new cardboard and a faint citrus from some kind of diffuser near the door. A handwritten chalkboard sign in the window said, "Since 1987" in loopy letters. Adrian stood inside it for 10 minutes, mildly overwhelmed. He was a person who excelled at acquiring things. He bought art, furniture, property, companies. He understood the language of acquisition. He did not understand the particular anxiety of standing in front of a wall of children's toys at 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon trying to figure out what was appropriate for a child he didn't know. Can I help you? The woman behind the counter was in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the patient expression of someone who had helped many uncertain people in this store. I'm looking for something for a 2.5-year-old, a girl. Any particular interests? She finds reading lights interesting, he said, and rain. The woman looked at him for a moment. Then, apparently accepting this as a legitimate specification, she said, "Come with me." She showed him a wooden weather station kit, simple, tactile, with a small spinner that showed wind direction and a rain gauge in large, colorful dials. At that age, they can't read the measurements, she said, but they love turning things and watching things move. It's more about the interaction than the data. He bought it. And a second thing she pointed out, a small illustrated board book about storms, with watercolor pictures of rain clouds and lightning bugs. He wasn't sure about the book. He almost put it back twice. He kept it. Walking back through the afternoon city with a toy store bag and a mind running several parallel tracks, Adrian Mercer came to a conclusion that he'd been circling since 2:30 in the morning. He had built something substantial. He had been, by the measure of what he had been taught mattered, successful. He had also, in the service of that success and the fear that lived underneath it, walked away from a small person who was currently terrified of vacuum cleaners and would only eat spiral pasta and thought reading lights in luxury sedans were fascinating. He could not undo the 29 months. That math was fixed. What was not yet fixed was everything after this. Saturday at 10. Coffee. 1 hour, maybe 2. In a small place on 22nd Street where his daughter would probably spend the whole time investigating the sugar packets, and he would sit across from Claire and try to figure out how to be someone other than the person he'd been. He didn't know if he was capable of it. He suspected he was about to find out. The rain had cleared completely by Thursday. The city was bright and cold and unreasonably beautiful the way Manhattan sometimes was in November. The sky, the particular shade of blue that existed only at high altitude and after storms. Adrian walked to work rather than taking the car, which he hadn't done in months. At the corner of Park and 46th, his phone buzzed. His father. He let it go to voicemail. Then, after half a block, he stopped and called back. It rang twice. Adrian, you called. A pause. I want you to think carefully about Saturday. I have thought carefully. I know you believe that. Another pause, longer. I want you to think about what it costs when these things go wrong, what it costs the child. Adrian stood on the sidewalk while the morning crowd flowed around him. He thought about what his father was actually saying and what he wasn't saying, and the fact that Victor Mercer had just used the word child without dismissiveness, which was not what he'd expected. You're worried I'll fail, Adrian said. I'm worried you'll start something you don't finish. So were you ever going to start anything at all? He didn't say it with heat. It was a genuine question. His father's silence was its own kind of answer. Saturday, Adrian said, 10 o'clock.
I'll let you know how it goes. He paused. You could come. The silence stretched to something uncomfortable. That's not... Victor stopped. Started again. That's not appropriate at this stage. No, Adrian agreed, but I wanted to say it. He hung up and walked the rest of the way to work with the particular clarity of someone who has finally stopped arguing with himself and is now just waiting to see what he does next. Friday night, he pulled out the board book from the toy store bag. He hadn't opened it. He sat at his kitchen table with a takeout container he'd mostly ignored and turned the book over in his hands. The cover was watercolor, blues and grays, a small figure in a yellow raincoat standing at a window looking at a storm. Simple illustration, clean lines. He opened it. The first page said, "Some nights the rain is so loud you can hear it thinking." He read it from cover to cover. It took 4 minutes. At the end, the small figure in the yellow raincoat opened a window and put her hand out into the rain, and the rain was described as feeling like cold needles and music at the same time. He closed the book. He thought about Lily laughing in the rain under the overhang. He thought about the sound of that laugh. He'd heard it once, for 30 seconds, through a car window in a storm, and the way it had operated on him like a key in a lock he hadn't known existed. He put the book beside the toy and set them next to his bag for Saturday. He went to bed at 11:30, which was early for him. He didn't sleep right away. But when he did not dream of conference rooms or closing prices or the faces of men across negotiating tables. He dreamed of rain. He arrived at Birch 12 minutes early. That was not typical behavior for Adrian Mercer, who operated on the principle that arriving exactly on time was a form of efficiency and arriving early was a form of anxiety. He had, in 30 years of professional life, never once shown up to a meeting 12 minutes ahead of schedule. He ordered a black coffee he didn't particularly want and took a corner table that had a clear view of the door and sat with his hands around the mug and tried to look like a person who was comfortable. Birch was the kind of Chelsea coffee shop that had existed in the neighborhood long enough to have regulars with named orders, the sort of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and a tortoiseshell cat that apparently lived near the radiator and accepted petting with the dignified indifference of someone doing you a favor. The windows were fogged with warmth. It smelled like espresso and something baked, cardamom maybe. He watched the door. At 3 minutes past 10, Claire came in. She was holding Lily against her hip with one arm and pushing the door with her shoulder because her other hand was managing a tote bag and a small backpack in the shape of a ladybug. She was wearing a dark green coat he didn't recognize, her hair pulled back, and she had the look of a woman who had prepared herself for something difficult and was walking into it with the careful posture of someone who has decided not to show how much they have prepared. Lily spotted the cat immediately. "Cat," she announced loudly and with total conviction, pointing. "I see the cat," Claire said. "Let's say hi to—" She looked up, found Adrian, and the sentence adjusted in real time. "Let's find our table first." Adrian stood. He wasn't sure whether to wave. He did not wave. He stood there holding his coffee mug and watched Claire navigate the room and thought about how strange it was to be a person who had once known every small habit of this woman. The way she held her fork, the specific sound she made when she was reading something she found interesting, and now was standing in a coffee shop trying to figure out how to say hello. "Hi," Claire said. She set the ladybug backpack on the chair beside her. "Hi." He looked at Lily, who was craning around her mother to locate the cat again. "Hi, Lily." Lily looked at him with the same frank assessment she'd aimed at him in the car. Then she said, "Cat," because that was clearly the more pressing issue. "There is definitely a cat," Adrian agreed. Something in Claire's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly. He didn't know whether it was relief that he'd answered correctly or simply surprise that he'd engaged at all. They sat. A server came. Claire ordered a latte and a banana and a small cup of dry cereal for Lily, which arrived in a way that suggested she ordered this here regularly. The server already knew to bring it in a paper cup, not a bowl. Small detail. Adrian noticed it with the specific attention of someone cataloging the shape of a life he hadn't witnessed. "So," Claire said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "So," he said. The cereal cup absorbed Lily's complete attention.
She sorted the pieces by what appeared to be a system only she understood. "This is a nice place," Adrian said. Claire looked at him. "That was not a great opening," he acknowledged. "No." But the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, exactly. Something that could become one under different circumstances. "It really wasn't." He tried again. "I brought something."
For her. He'd had the toy store bag beside his chair and he moved it onto the table, feeling, in a way he hadn't felt in years, genuinely uncertain about how this would land. The woman at the store said it was appropriate for her age. "You can tell me if it's not." Claire looked at the bag without moving to open it. "A toy." "It's a weather station. Wood. No small parts." He'd checked the packaging 3 times. "And a book. About storms. It has good illustrations." A beat. "You got her a book about storms." "She seemed to enjoy the rain," he said. "Last week." Claire's expression was complicated in a way that he sat with rather than tried to fix. She reached over, opened the bag, looked at both items. She held the book for a moment, turned it over, opened the first page. "Some nights the rain is so loud you can hear it thinking," she read aloud, quietly. Lily looked up from her serial investigation, apparently recognizing the timbre of being read to. "That's a good line," Claire said. She said it like she hadn't meant to. "I thought so too." Lily had abandoned the cereal and was now reaching toward the bag. "What dat?" "That's a present," Claire said. "From Adrian." The name sat in the air between the adults for a moment. Not Daddy. Not yet. Adrian. Claire had made a considered decision in that syllable, and he understood it and didn't push. "Want to see?" Lily asked him directly, holding out her hand for the weather station box. He slid it across the table to her. She grabbed it with both hands and immediately turned it upside down. "The spinner goes on top," he said. "When I was a kid, I had something like this. Not exactly this, but I used to put it out my window to see which way the wind was going." Claire looked at him. "I didn't know that." "There are probably a lot of things we didn't know about each other by the time we stopped trying." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at her coffee. Lily had found the spinner, detached during her investigation of the box, and was making it rotate with her finger, clearly enchanted by the sound it made. They sat with the quiet for a moment. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the quiet of 2 people who once knew each other very well relearning the shape of a shared space. "She calls it a twirly," Claire said, nodding at the spinner. "She does that with everything that spins. Wheels, fans, anything. Twirly. Is that its official designation?" "In this family, yes. The word stands." He looked at Lily. She had the spinner pressed to her cheek now, apparently enjoying some aspect of it he couldn't identify. Her expression was one of complete, uncomplicated pleasure. "She's happy," he said. He meant it as an observation, but it came out as something heavier. "She is," Claire said. "She's genuinely a happy kid, which, given everything—" She stopped, started differently. "I worked hard at that, making sure she was happy." "I know you did." "Do you?" He met her eyes. "I'm starting to understand what that means. The scope of it." Claire didn't respond right away. She watched her daughter spin the twirly, and her face wore the particular expression of a woman holding 2 contradictory feelings in the same moment. Something protective, and something that was trying cautiously to stay open. "She asks about you," Claire said finally. Quietly. He went very still. "Not constantly. But she sees other kids with their dads at the park, and she asks where her dad is." Claire turned the mug in her hands. "I've been telling her you live far away, which is technically true, just not the geography I meant." He didn't have a response to that. There wasn't one. He sat with it. "What did you tell her about today?" he asked. "I said we were having coffee with a friend." A pause. "I know that's not—" I wasn't ready to explain more than that. Not until I knew how today was going to go. "That's fair." "Adrian." She looked at him with a steadiness that he had forgotten she possessed. Claire had always been a person who went very quiet when things mattered most, as opposed to his instinct, which was to fill important silences with strategy. "I need you to understand something before we go any further with this. I need you to understand that what I'm protecting here is not my feelings about you. We are beyond that. What I'm protecting is her. She glanced at Lily, who was now attempting to put the spinner on the tortoiseshell cat, which had wandered over with the expression of an animal accustomed to small children. If you're going to be in her life, you have to understand that every time you cancel, every time you disappear, every time you choose something else, she will feel that. She's going to learn what it means that you're her father from the pattern of what you do, not what you intend.
But I understand. You say that. I need to see it. I know. He wrapped both hands around his mug. That's fair. That's the only fair thing. The cat had accepted Lily's company with the resigned dignity of a creature that has made peace with its role in the universe. Lily was stroking it with the focused intensity of someone performing an important task. Soft, she reported. Very soft, Claire agreed. Adrian watched this. The cat, the child, the ordinary Saturday morning unfolding, and understood in a way that was less like an insight and more like a slow physical change that he wanted to be here. Not in the abstract, not in the guilt-driven, obligation-shaped way he'd been afraid this would feel. He actually, specifically, wanted to be sitting at this table watching his daughter investigate a coffee shop cat. That wanting scared him more than almost anything he'd experienced in a boardroom. They stayed for an hour and 40 minutes, longer than either of them had planned. Lily finished the cereal, investigated Adrian's coffee mug with great suspicion, determined it was not for her, and spent the last 30 minutes in a world of her own construction under the table, talking to the weather station box in a language that was approximately 60% words. During that time, Adrian and Claire talked, not about the important things, not yet, and both of them knew that was right. They talked about smaller things, the kind of things you cover when you are relearning a person rather than confronting them. Claire's job, which had expanded. She was now managing 3 concurrent arts programs and had been offered a coordinator role with a larger organization she was considering. Her apartment, which needed a new water heater. The ear infection, which she described with the particular darkly comic energy of a person who has been through something exhausting enough to become a story. 3 rounds of antibiotics, she said. 3. The second one turned her stool bright orange for a week, which the pediatrician swore was normal and which I did not find remotely reassuring. That sounds terrible. It was memorable. She paused. She was a good patient, actually. Better than I would have been. She just sort of accepted it. The medicine, the doctor, all of it. She's adaptable. She gets that from you, he said. Claire looked at him. I mean it, he said. You were always the most adaptable person I knew. I just don't think I ever said it. A long pause. Claire looked out the window at the Saturday morning street. No, she said. You didn't. He didn't apologize. The apology wanted to surface, and he held it back, understanding that it was too large and too late to be useful in this particular moment, and would need to come differently, later, when it had earned its context. From under the table, twirly. Bring the twirly up here, Claire said. A small hand appeared at the edge of the table, followed by Lily, who had apparently decided the floor exploration phase was complete. She climbed up onto the seat beside her mother and held the spinner up toward Adrian. You want me to spin it? He asked. She watched him with those serious dark eyes. He took the spinner carefully, turned it between his fingers, set it spinning. Lily watched it rotate with her chin in her hand, the posture of someone deeply considering a philosophical question. Again, she said when it stopped. He spun it again. This happened 11 times. He counted. They said goodbye on the sidewalk outside Birch. The November air was sharp, the sky the same post-storm blue from earlier in the week. Claire buckled Lily into the stroller, a process Lily assisted by providing detailed opinions on, and straightened up. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. That was... She seemed to be selecting her word carefully. Okay. That was okay. Coming from Claire, he understood this was a significant rating. Same time next week? He asked. Or different location, if you want to change. She studied him for a moment, the careful, still expression that meant she was reading the situation with all available instruments. There's a playground on 24th she likes, she said. Thursday afternoon is better for us than Saturday. I have a program review on Saturday mornings that's been rescheduled twice. Thursday works. 4 o'clock.
The playground has a blue climbing structure. You can't miss it. I'll be there. She started to turn the stroller, then stopped. The book, she said, not looking at him, looking at the street ahead. It was a good choice. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to improve on that. He watched her wheel the stroller down 22nd Street toward the corner, Lily's hand visible over the rim of the stroller waving at something or someone only she could see, a pigeon, probably, or a passing dog, or just the idea of the morning. He stood on the sidewalk until they turned the corner. Then he went home and sat at his kitchen table and did not touch his phone for 2 hours, which was the longest he'd gone without checking it on a weekend in approximately 4 years. Thursday came. He was at the playground at 3:52. The blue climbing structure was not subtle. It dominated the corner of the small park with the cheerful aggression of a primary color in a neutral space. He sat on a bench with a view of the entrance gate and waited and told himself he was not anxious. He was anxious. Claire arrived with Lily at 4:03. Lily was dressed in a red coat and the ladybug backpack, which apparently had been promoted to daily use, and she was talking continuously about something that Claire was tracking with the practiced half-attention of a parent who monitors without always actively processing. When Lily spotted the climbing structure, the talking stopped, and she looked at it with the silence of pure want. "Can I?" she asked Claire. "Can you what?" "Go." "Go where?" Lily pointed at the structure with the patience of someone dealing with a slow adult. "Yes," Claire said. "Boots on the steps, not the side rails." Lily was already moving. Claire watched her for a moment, the involuntary parental body check, scanning for hazards, and then turned to Adrian. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He stood from the bench. "How was the program review?" She blinked slightly. He'd remembered. He could see her processing that. "Rescheduled again," she said. "Third time. I'm starting to think the director just doesn't want to have it." "What's the review for?" "Funding allocation. The mural project has gone about 40% over budget, and someone has to account for that, and I have a feeling the artist got inspired and bought more paint is not going to be a satisfying answer." "It's not a satisfying answer in any industry." "No," she agreed with the grim humor of experience. "It's really not." They sat on the bench. Lily was working her way up the climbing structure with methodical determination, pausing periodically to evaluate the next handhold. "She's fearless," Adrian said. "She's cautious, actually. People think she's fearless, but she's not. She just assesses risk quietly instead of loudly. She'll sit at the bottom of something for a full minute before she tries it." Claire paused. "Then once she decides it's okay, she commits completely." He watched Lily reach the top of the structure and plant both hands on the highest bar and look out over the playground from this summit with the expression of someone surveying conquered territory. "She's going to be terrifying when she's older," he said. Claire laughed. It was short and surprised and real, and the sound of it did something to his chest that he didn't try to analyze. "I know," she said. "I think about that a lot. She's going to be absolutely ruthless and completely confident, and some poor teacher is not going to know what to do with her. Some poor teacher should be prepared. Some poor teacher has about 3 years to get ready." They sat with the easy silence of two people who have briefly, inadvertently, stopped being careful with each other. Then the ease passed and the carefulness returned, and neither of them pushed against it. Lily came down the slide with her arms straight up and her mouth open in a soundless shriek of speed joy, and hit the rubber base at the bottom and immediately turned and went back to the stairs. "Again," she said, to no one in particular. Just to the universe in general. Adrian found himself there for an hour and 40 minutes again. He hadn't planned to stay that long. It didn't seem like a decision he made so much as a condition he noticed. Time was passing and he was still here, and there was nowhere he would rather be. He pushed Lily on the swing for 15 minutes, which was apparently the correct duration because she called a halt by simply climbing out while it was still moving, which took 10 years off his life. He located a paper airplane book on his phone after she found a scrap of paper and demanded he make it fly. The result was structurally questionable but adequate. She declared it a bird and attempted to return it to the sky. At 5:30, Claire stood and began gathering the ladybug backpack. "We have to get home," she said. "Dinner and bath, and she'll be homicidal by 7 if we miss the window." "She gets it from you," he said. "The tired to hostile pipeline." Claire gave him a look. Then she said, "That is possibly accurate." They walked to the park gate. He held it open. Lily walked through and immediately began investigating a crack in the sidewalk with great interest. "Same time next week?" he asked. Claire took a breath. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it as information rather than criticism." "Okay." "She asked about you on the way here." She was watching Lily and not him. She said, "Is the man going to be there?" "Not by name. She doesn't have a name for you yet." But she remembered. He said nothing. "That means you're already in her head," Claire said, "which means every time you don't show up, she's going to notice it." She turned to look at him. "I'm not saying that to pressure you. I'm saying it because I want to be completely transparent with you about what's happening from her side. You asked to be part of this. This is what being part of this looks like." "I know." "Do you want to be the man she's looking for at the playground, Adrian? Because that's who you're becoming, whether you finish it or not." He held her gaze. "I want to be that person." "Then be consistent," she said. "That's all. Just be consistent." "Next Thursday, same time." She nodded, picked up Lily, who had completed her sidewalk investigation and was ready to be carried. Lily looked over her mother's shoulder at Adrian with the same serious, assessing look she'd given him in the car and again in the coffee shop. Then she held out the paper airplane. He took it. She seemed to consider this a satisfying conclusion to the afternoon and buried her face in Claire's shoulder. He stood on the sidewalk holding a badly folded paper airplane and watched them walk down the block. Ook. The visits became Thursday afternoons. Not always the playground, so sometimes the coffee shop. Once a children's museum where Lily spent 45 minutes at a water table and left completely saturated and deeply satisfied. Once, in December, a walk through the Christmas market at Columbus Circle, which Lily approached with the strategic intensity of a general surveying a battlefield, deciding exactly which of the 1,000 possible delights to invest in. She chose a small wooden rabbit with movable joints. She named it Rain. He didn't comment on the name. Claire caught his expression and almost smiled. Each visit, Lily adapted him slightly further into her world. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic child in the way of performances and declarations. She was methodical about it. She started handing him things to hold. Books she was done with. The rain rabbit when she needed both hands for something. Once, the remainder of a granola bar with exactly one bite taken from it, offered with complete seriousness. He accepted the granola bar with the gravity it deserved and ate it. Claire watched this with the expression of someone who has prepared a speech they keep not needing to give. She still didn't call him anything in front of Lily. He didn't push. He understood, without it being said, that the name she used for him in Lily's presence would be a decision made when she was ready and not before. But in early December, at the coffee shop, Lily deeply engaged with a picture book about penguins, Claire said quietly, "She calls you the Rain Man." He looked up. "Because you were in the rain," she said. "That's how she explains you when she talks to her daycare friends. She tells them about you and she calls you the Rain Man like it's one word." A pause. "I thought you should know." He looked at his coffee. She thinks of me as one concept," he said slowly. "Not a person yet. A concept from a specific night." "Yes." "Is that—" He didn't know how to finish the question. "It's very her," Claire said. "She categorizes things, organizes them by where she first encountered them. The cat at Birch is the coffee cat. The Christmas market is the rabbit place." She glanced at Lily. "You're the Rain Man." He nodded. Something in him shifted with it. Not sadness exactly, but the particular weight of understanding exactly where you stand in someone's world and recognizing that you have to build from that real place, not from where you wish you were. "I'll take it," he said. Claire looked at him for a moment. "I know you will," she said. And there was something in her voice that was cautiously, without announcement, not unkind. In the third week of December, he ran into his father at the company's holiday dinner. This was unavoidable. The dinner was a tradition dating to before Adrian's involvement in the company, held in a private room at a midtown restaurant, 70 people who collectively moved more capital than most countries. Adrian attended every year. He would have canceled it before he canceled Thursdays. Victor found him near the bar before the formal program began. "You look different," his father said.
I look the same. You don't. Adrian accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. How was the Singapore call? Victor's expression said he knew what Adrian was doing. Fine. The allocation went through. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the room with the practiced surveillance of a man who had spent 50 years reading gatherings for useful information. How is the Thursday arrangement progressing? Well,
What does that mean? It means she let me push her on a swing and she gave me half a granola bar. He looked at his father. I understand that's not the kind of metric your quarterly reviews deal in, but it means something. Victor considered this with the expression of a man for whom the metrics of children's granola bars were genuinely foreign. And Claire? We're managing. Is she cooperative? Adrian set down his glass. Don't do that. Don't assess her for utility. Victor's jaw tightened. I'm asking a factual question. You're asking whether she's compliant with what I'm doing, and the answer is she's being more decent to me than I have any right to expect, and she's doing it because she's a better person than either of us has given her credit for. He held his father's gaze. She let me back in. She didn't have to do that. She did it because it was the right thing for Lily, at personal cost to herself. That's not cooperation, that's character. A silence. The room moved around them, conversation in glasses, and the specific low-level performance of professional socializing. She was always perceptive, Victor said finally. It wasn't an endorsement exactly, but it wasn't dismissal. Yes, Adrian said. She was. His father picked up his own glass. I have a donor dinner in January I need your support for. The Harrington Fund. You've met Carl Harrington. I'll be there. Thursday of the 14th. I'm free Thursday evenings. Victor looked at him. I have Thursday afternoons, Adrian said. Evenings I'm available. His father said nothing to that, then, fine, 7 o'clock. He moved away into the room and Adrian watched him go. This man who had built an empire and a son and had managed, through some precise combination of intention and blindness, to nearly lose both, and thought about what it meant to notice a pattern clearly and still take this long to do anything about it. He thought about Lily handing him Rain the rabbit and asking him to hold it while she climbed. The small weight of that trust, offered without ceremony or condition. He thought, I am not going to be this story. He meant his father's story, the pattern running down the generations like a fault line. He meant, not all the way, not completely. I'm going to interrupt it. January came with the particular bluntness of a New York winter that had run out of atmospheric drama and was now simply cold. The holiday decorations vanished overnight, the way they always did, and the city reverted to its working gray self. Adrian kept Thursdays. He did not miss a single one in the month and a half since they'd started. Twice the weather was genuinely terrible, and he came anyway, and once Lily had a cold and they stayed inside at Claire's apartment. The first time he'd been inside it. And he sat on the floor and built blocks while Lily directed from the couch, with the focused authority of a person who did not feel well enough to do things herself, but very much felt well enough to supervise. The apartment was small and not especially tidy, and there were drawings on the refrigerator and a drying rack in the corner that had been there long enough to become furniture, and a bookshelf that had been overwhelmed by children's books sometime around Lily's second birthday and never fully recovered. It looked to him like a home, the specific kind of home that happens in the margins of a hard life, not decorated for effect but worn in by actual use. He helped with the blocks. He followed Lily's instructions regarding which color went where with the same seriousness he brought to boardroom presentations, which Lily seemed to consider the correct response. Claire made tea and sat on the couch with her laptop open to something work-related and kept one eye on Lily and occasionally looked up to find him on the floor surrounded by primary-colored blocks, and her expression during these glances was something he was beginning to learn to read, though he hadn't yet found the word for it. Something careful. Something that wanted to be more than careful and was still deciding. She trusts you, Claire said that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch between them. Simply stopped and closed her eyes between one moment and the next, the specific talent of small children. Claire said it quietly, not looking at him, looking at Lily. She asks for you on days that aren't Thursdays now. He was quiet. I don't say that to... I'm not holding it over you, she said. I just... I thought you should know that it's working. What you're doing, it's working. He looked at his daughter sleeping. He looked at Claire's profile in the lamplight, the tiredness she carried like a second coat, the particular way she sat when she was trying not to lean on anything. I'm sorry, he said, not for any one specific thing, for the shape of it, all of it. Claire was quiet for a long moment. I know you are, she said, not forgiving exactly, but acknowledging. I know. They sat with Lily sleeping between them while the winter moved against the windows, and neither of them said anything more because nothing more needed to be said that night. He left at 9. Walking to the car, he passed under the green awning of Claire's building and looked up at the lit window on the 3rd floor and stood there for a moment in the cold air. He had been the kind of man who measured his days by closings and calls and quarterly targets, by the ledger of professional wins that compounded into something his father could review on Monday morning. He was becoming, slowly and with considerable difficulty and without any certainty about how it would end, a different kind of man, the kind who measured Thursdays in granola bars and block towers, and the specific weight of a small sleeping person who had decided without drama or announcement that he was worth trusting. He didn't know yet what that made him. He suspected he was going to spend a long time finding out. The window went dark at 9:40. He was already home by then, but he'd watched until it did. The call came on a Tuesday. Adrian was in a meeting, the kind that had no natural endpoint, a restructuring discussion with 4 lawyers and 2 accountants, and a senior partner from the Singapore fund who had flown in specifically for this and was therefore going to extract maximum value from every minute of his presence, regardless of what any of them actually needed to accomplish. Adrian was half listening to a debate about liability structures and thinking about Thursday, which was 2 days away, and whether Lily's cold had fully cleared when his phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it out of reflex. Claire. Calling, not texting. In the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. He picked it up. Excuse me, he said to the room, and walked out before anyone could respond. In the hallway, he answered. What's wrong? Her voice was controlled in the specific way that meant she was working very hard at it. Lily has a fever, 104. I'm taking her to the ER at Lenox Hill. A pause, very brief. I thought you should know. I'm coming. You don't have to, I'm coming. He was already moving back through the conference room door to grab his jacket. Which entrance? A beat. Pediatric emergency. 67th and Park. 20 minutes. He told the room there was a family emergency and left. The Singapore partner said something he didn't hear. The pediatric ER at Lenox Hill was the particular controlled chaos of a place that had organized itself around the fact that children do not get sick on convenient schedules. The waiting area held a specific cross-section of parental anxiety, the visibly scared, the managing by movement, the sitting very still because stopping moving means thinking. The fluorescent light was the color of institutionalized calm. He found Claire in a bay near the far end of the floor, separated from the hallway by a curtain that had been pushed halfway back. She was in the chair beside the bed, which was too large for Lily, but had been outfitted with rails and a thin hospital blanket, and she was holding Lily's hand. Lily was asleep, or something close to sleep, the flat, shallow stillness of a sick child, her face flushed and damp, the rain rabbit tucked under her arm in a way that suggested Claire had put it there. Adrian stopped at the curtain edge. Claire looked up. Her eyes were dry, but the skin around them was tight, in a way that told him exactly how long she'd been holding herself together. They're running tests, she said. They think it might be a UTI that went systemic. Her temp spiked this afternoon. She looked back at Lily. She was fine this morning. She ate breakfast. She was fine. He came in and pulled the second chair to the other side of the bed and sat down. Okay, he said. Claire looked at him across the bed. Her expression said, Why are you here? And also thank you for being here. And I'm not sure what to do with both of those things at once. He didn't try to explain himself. He just stayed. A nurse came through at intervals. A doctor, young, direct, efficient, explained that the UTI had likely been developing for several days, that the fever spike was the body mounting a significant response, that they were starting IV antibiotics and would monitor through the night. She said it in the calm, matter-of-fact tone of someone who needed the parents in front of her to be functional and was therefore delivering information at a pace they could absorb. "Through the night," Claire said. "Yes. We want to see the fever break before we reassess. It could be morning, could be longer." The doctor looked between them. "One of you can stay. The other can use the family waiting room." A pause, brief. "We'll both stay," Adrian said. Claire looked at him. "If that's okay," he said to her. Not to the doctor. Claire turned back to Lily. "That's fine," she said. The night had the quality of hospital time, which is different from regular time. It moved in intervals marked by vitals checks and IV bag changes and the distant sounds of the floor rather than by any clock. The overhead lights in the bay were turned down after 9. Claire had the good chair, the one with the arm that folded out. Adrian had the bad chair, which was a plastic model designed for a person of approximately half his height. He didn't mention this. Lily's fever broke at 2:14 in the morning. He knew the exact time because he was awake and looking at his watch when the nurse came in, checked the thermometer reading, and said quietly and with the measured relief of someone who delivers these updates many times a week, "We're at 101, coming down." Claire, who had been asleep in the good chair with her head tipped back at an angle that was going to cause serious neck problems, woke immediately. "What?" "Fever's dropping," the nurse said. 101. That's a good sign." Claire looked at Lily. Lily was still sleeping, but differently. The color in her face had shifted slightly, the flat stillness replaced by something that looked more like actual rest. Claire put her face in her hands for a moment. Not crying, just the specific collapse of someone who has been holding something very tight for many hours and has received permission to hold it slightly less tight. Adrian got up from the plastic chair, which he had been quietly at war with for 5 hours, and crouched in front of her. "Hey," he said. "She's okay." Claire lowered her hands. Her eyes were dry. Her face was exhausted in the deep structural way, the kind that sleep doesn't immediately fix. "I know," she said. "I know she is." He didn't touch her. He wanted to, in the uncomplicated human way of wanting to provide comfort to a person who is clearly in need of it, but he understood that the territory between them was still mapped in careful lines, and he didn't have the standing to cross that particular one without permission. So he stayed crouched in front of her, at her level, and didn't look away. "I used to think," Claire said very quietly, "that the worst part of doing this alone was the practical stuff, the logistics, the money. But it's not." She looked at Lily. "The worst part is nights like this, when something's wrong and you're the only person who knows how scared you are. There's no one else in the room who loves her." He said nothing. He sat with what she'd said and let it be what it was. "I'm here," he said finally. "I know that's late, but I'm here." She looked at him for a long moment in the low hospital light. "I know you are," she said. They sat through the rest of the night in the way of people who have found themselves on the same side of something for the first time in a long time. Not easily, not without the weight of everything that had come before, but genuinely. Wow. By morning, Lily's fever was at 99.4, and she was asking for juice and expressing strong opinions about the hospital blanket, which she had apparently decided was unacceptable. These seemed like extremely healthy signs. "It's scratchy," she told Adrian, who was the nearest available person to complain to. "Hospital blankets usually are," he agreed. She looked at him with the expression she made when adults provided information that confirmed her worldview but didn't actually solve the problem. "Fix it," she said. "I cannot fix the blanket. I can see if there's another one." "Okay." He asked the nurse, who located a softer option from a supply closet, not dramatically better, but enough that Lily accepted it and moved on to her next concern, which was the location of Rain the rabbit, which had migrated to the foot of the bed during the night. He retrieved Rain the rabbit. Lily held it against her chest and closed her eyes, not sleeping but resting. And he watched her and felt the thing he'd been learning to feel over these months, the specific quality of caring about someone's smallest problems because their problems were real to them and therefore real to you. Claire had stepped out to call her supervisor. He sat beside the bed alone with Lily and the soft sounds of the hospital floor and thought about how different this was from the life he'd been living 6 months ago. Not better in any uncomplicated way. It was harder, actually, and less controlled, and full of feelings he hadn't budgeted for, but different in a way that felt, beneath all the difficulty, like movement in the right direction. "Adrian," Lily said without opening her eyes. He looked at her. She had stopped using the Rain Man sometime in December and started using his name, which Claire said had been her own decision, arrived at one morning over breakfast with no announcement. "Yes?" "Will you stay?" He understood she meant stay here, today, in this room. Small, practical, immediate. "Yes," he said. "I'm staying." She shifted rein slightly and didn't say anything else. He stayed. They discharged Lily that afternoon with a prescription and a follow-up appointment and instructions about fluid intake that Claire wrote on the back of a receipt because she didn't have anything else handy, and it was the kind of solution that worked. In the elevator down, Lily stood between them holding both their hands, not because anyone suggested it, but because she reached out for them with the practical economy of a child who needed to hold on to something, and there were two available hands at the right height. Adrian looked down at her. Then he looked up, and Claire was already looking at him with an expression that he had been slowly learning to read over these months, the one she wore when something was happening that she hadn't fully prepared for. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. The elevator opened and they walked out into the pale January afternoon, and he got them a car because Claire's hands were full, and Lily's legs had apparently stopped working somewhere between the elevator and the lobby, which was announced by her becoming a complete deadweight against Claire's hip. "She does this when she's tired," Claire said, redistributing the child. "I've noticed. She becomes a different density of person. Like a star collapsing," he said. Claire looked at him. "That is exactly what it's like." She sounded surprised that he'd found the right description. In the car, Lily fell asleep immediately against Claire's arm. The city moved past the windows in its January gray. Claire kept her eyes out the window for most of the ride, and he kept his eyes on the street ahead, and the absence of conversation was not uncomfortable. At the green awning, he helped carry things up. He didn't ask. Claire didn't tell him not to. He helped get Lily settled in her bed, a process the child participated in minimally, still at the dense collapse density. And he put Rain beside her, and Claire tucked the blanket in with the specific efficiency of 10,000 repetitions. In the living room, Claire stood in the center of the space and did the thing people do after long, difficult nights when they're finally home. She stopped, just for a moment. The particular stop of someone allowing themselves to be done. He stood near the door with his jacket still on. "Do you want coffee?" she asked. "I'm going to make some." "Sure." He took his jacket off. He sat at her kitchen table while she made coffee in the small kitchen, moving with the muscle memory efficiency of someone who has performed this action thousands of times in this space. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the street sounds were muffled by the cold. She brought 2 mugs and sat across from him, and both of them wrapped their hands around their mugs and didn't immediately speak. "Thank you for last night," she said finally. "I wanted to be there." "I know." She looked at her mug. "That's what I mean by thank you." He nodded. "She said your name first," Claire said. When her fever spiked, when she was confused and scared, she said my name and then she said yours. A pause. "I don't tell you that to... I'm not making a point. I'm just telling you because you should know. That's where she is with you now." He looked at his hands around the mug. "Claire." He had been deciding whether to say the next thing for several weeks. He had decided and undecided multiple times. He said it. "I know this is not the right time, and I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that what I feel when I'm with you and Lily is not what I expected to feel. And I'm not sure what to do with that except to say it out loud so it exists somewhere other than just in my head." She was quiet for a long moment. "Adrian," she said, "I know. We're not there. I know we're not. I need you to understand why." She set her mug down carefully, centering it on the table with the specific precision of someone organizing her thoughts through her hands. "It's not because of anger. I'm not angry at you anymore. I was, for a long time, but I'm not now. It's because trust is built in one direction, and I have watched you build it for 4 months, and I don't know yet if I trust the permanence of it. The man who shows up on Thursdays, I don't know yet if that's who you are now or a version of you that exists specifically in this context." "That's fair," he said. "I need time. I know. And I need you to not to not be waiting for me to catch up. Because if you're in this for Lily, it has to be its own thing, separate from what you feel about me. She can't be the bridge between us. She's not. He met her eyes. I'm here for her because she's my daughter and I love her. What I said about you is separate. I'm not asking you to do anything about it. Claire held his gaze. She looked tired and careful, and something underneath both that was harder to name. Okay, she said. Okay. They finished their coffee. He left before noon. Walking down the block, he felt the complex, specific weight of a conversation that had gone exactly as well as could be reasonably expected and still left you with something difficult to carry. He carried it. 3 weeks later, Victor called him to the office. Not unusual on its own. Victor called people to the office the way some men sent formal correspondence, preferring the territorial advantage of his own space. But there was something in the tone of the assistant's scheduling call that made Adrian keep his jacket on when he arrived. The documents on the desk told him why. 4 pages. Dense with language that he recognized as the particular dialect of family legal maneuver, trusts, amended succession terms, conditions, and provisions. He didn't need to read every line. He was familiar enough with the architecture to see the shape of it from the first paragraph. Sit down, Victor said. I'll stand. His father looked at him with the controlled expression of a man who had prepared for this conversation. The restructuring requires a clear succession structure, Victor said. The Singapore partners need assurance that the firm's leadership is stable. That means the next phase of the transfer has to be, this is about Claire, Adrian said. This is about the firm. This document, he picked up the first page, scanned it, requires me to demonstrate that my personal life does not constitute a liability to the firm's reputation or partnerships. That I have addressed, he kept reading. His voice went flat. Addressed prior familial entanglements in a manner consistent with the firm's professional standards. That's what you've written. He set the page down. You want me to formally distance myself from Claire and Lily. Legally. In writing. The language is precise. You chose it. Victor's jaw tightened. He stood from behind his desk, which was a move he made when he wanted to equalize the physical geometry of a difficult conversation. The Harrington Fund is bringing in 3 additional investors, European, old money. They have very specific views about, I don't care, leadership stability and personal accountability. I don't care what they have views about. Adrian's voice was even, not heated, the cold of something that has moved past heat into something harder. You've been running this variation for 3 months, different forms, different angles, the Singapore concern, the European investors, the restructuring liability. It's the same thing each time, and the answer is the same each time. The answer cannot always be the same, Adrian. There are consequences. I know what the consequences are. He picked up all 4 pages and stacked them neatly and placed them back on the desk facing his father. I'm not signing this. I'm not signing any version of this. I am not going to put a legal document between myself and my daughter because it makes the optics cleaner for people who don't know she exists. Victor looked at him steadily. You're willing to sacrifice some. I'm willing to sacrifice whatever the current number is, Adrian said. The firm, the succession structure, the European investors, the Harrington Fund, all of it. I'm not going to do to Lily what you did to me and then dress it up as a professional decision. The silence in the room was specific, the kind that comes when someone says something true and very direct in a place where things are usually said obliquely. Victor's face did something Adrian rarely saw it do. It shifted in a way that was not controlled, a small, involuntary movement around the jaw and the eyes, the kind that happens when something lands that you didn't fully prepare for, even though you should have. What I did to you, Victor said, very quietly. What you did to me, Adrian confirmed, which was exactly this logic. The firm first, the professional standing first. Everything personal is a liability to be managed. He kept his voice level because raising it would give his father permission to focus on the register rather than the content. I lived inside that logic for 41 years. I built my entire understanding of myself inside it. And I spent 4 months watching a 2-year-old hand me a granola bar, and I'm done with it. I'm done with the whole architecture of it. His father was quiet for a long time. The city outside the window moved in its mute, indifferent way. Traffic below. A helicopter far off. the sounds of a place that didn't pause for personal reckonings. The Harrington dinner is Thursday, Victor said finally. Thursday evenings I'm available, Adrian said. As I've told you. Victor looked at the documents on the desk, then at his son. I'm not going to change this, Adrian said, clearly without heat, so there could be no misunderstanding. I need you to understand that. Not because I'm being stubborn, because I've actually made a decision and I've made it with complete understanding of what it costs. That's different from stubborn. His father looked at him for a long moment, the controlled face, the 73 years of practiced authority. Then something moved in it. Not dramatically, but something. Go, Victor said, quietly. I have calls. Adrian picked up his jacket from the chair. Dad? He hadn't used the word in a long time. He used it now deliberately. I'm not leaving the firm. I'm not walking away from what we built. I'm refusing to make it the reason I abandoned my child. Those are two different things. There's space in this life for both, and I intend to find it. He paused. But not at the cost of the documents on that desk. Not ever. He left. Diane was waiting outside the elevator. This was not by coincidence. Diane had been with him long enough to monitor the calendar of difficult meetings and position herself accordingly. How did it go? She asked. About how you'd expect. She fell into step beside him. Should I be concerned about your employment status? No. He pressed the lobby button. The firm is mine as much as it's his. That was settled 4 years ago. He knows that. And the documents? He looked at her. I've been with you 6 years, she said. I know what kind of meetings produce 4-page documents on short notice. The documents are not going to be signed, he said. Please schedule the Harrington dinner for Thursday the 14th at 7, and clear Friday morning. I need to take Lily to her follow-up appointment. Diane wrote both items in the small notebook she carried. Then she said, carefully, You should know that the Singapore partners called this morning asking for a meeting before end of month. Schedule it. And your father's assistant has cleared his calendar for next week. That usually means. I know what it usually means. The elevator opened. He stepped in. Schedule a one-on-one with Victor for Wednesday. Tell him I'd like to have lunch, off-site. She looked up from the notebook. Lunch. Lunch. Like people. She wrote it down with the expression of someone filing an unusual datum. Is there anything else? She asked. He thought for a moment. Order flowers for Claire Bennett. Not from me. Just from the arrangement account. White tulips. Don't include a card. Diane looked at him for a fraction of a second longer than professionally necessary. Of course, she said, and the elevator closed. What? He told Claire about the documents that Thursday at the playground, not because he had to, but because he had decided, deliberately and after consideration, that if he was serious about the kind of person he was trying to become, that person did not filter information to create favorable impressions. She listened without interrupting. The playground was quieter in January, cold enough to reduce the usual noise to a few determined children and their equally determined parents. Lily was on the climbing structure, moving with the recovered energy of a child who had been sick and has bounced back with the specific vindictiveness of the young. When he finished, Claire was quiet for a moment. What did you say to him? She asked. I told him I wasn't signing it, that I wasn't going to put a legal document between myself and Lily. And I told him what his version of those priorities had cost me growing up, and what I was choosing not to repeat. Claire looked at the climbing structure where Lily was narrating some private adventure to Rain the rabbit, who was participating from Lily's coat pocket. Your father, she said slowly, is not a villain. Adrian looked at her. I know he's done things that... I know about the settlement pressure. I know about the early conversations. I know he tried to make me into something manageable. She kept her eyes on Lily. But villains are easier than people who are genuinely limited by what they were taught. He built something real. He just built it with the tools he had, and the tools were missing several things. She paused. That doesn't make it okay. But it means there might be room in this story for him to be someone other than the person who signed those documents. He looked at her. This was not what he had expected her to say. You're more generous than I would be, he said. I have a 2-year-old who has your eyes, she said. It's harder to write off the source material than I expected.
It took him a moment. Then she said, I'm not saying trust him. I'm saying don't close the door before he's had the chance to try it differently. She finally turned to look at him. Because you're asking me to give you that same room, to give you the chance to be different from who you were. I can't hold that standard for you and not at least allow the possibility for him. Well, he sat with that. You're a better person than me, he said. I mean that without any flattery in it. I know, she said. I've been aware of that for some time. The corner of his mouth moved. She almost smiled. Lily called from the top of the climbing structure. Watch me! They both looked up. She launched herself down the slide with Rain in her fist, and her mouth open in the soundless shriek of velocity, and landed at the bottom and immediately looked at the bench to confirm the audience. I saw, Adrian called. Me too, Claire said. Lily registered this approval and went back to the stairs. The lunch with Victor was on a Wednesday, a place in Midtown that Victor had been going to for 20 years, run by a family that knew his order. He was already seated when Adrian arrived, which was not a strategic positioning. Victor simply preferred to be seated before others. Old habit. They ordered. The waiter left. The water sat untouched on both sides. I want to talk about something other than business, Adrian said. Victor looked at him. All right. I want to talk about when I was 10. A pause. His father's face did the controlled thing. Adrian, not as an accusation, as a conversation we never had. He kept his voice even. You went to London for 6 weeks when I was 10. I know it was the Harrington acquisition, the original one, before Carl Harrington was involved. It went over schedule. You called twice. Mom had already left by then. He looked at his father. I'm not telling you this to make you feel a particular way about it. I'm telling you because I think neither of us has ever said these things out loud, and I think that's part of why the pattern keeps running. Victor was quiet. I'm not the only one who learned to be distant, Adrian said. I learned it from somewhere. I'm not saying that to shift responsibility. I'm saying it because I think if we're going to have a different kind of relationship, you and me and potentially you and Lily, we have to be able to say true things to each other. His father picked up his water glass, set it down without drinking. I called twice, Victor said very quietly, because there was nothing I knew how to say. The admission sat between them with a weight neither of them had expected. I know, Adrian said. I'm starting to understand that. What it's like to be in front of someone who needs something from you that you haven't learned to give. Victor looked at the table. She has your eyes, Adrian said. Lily, the dark ones. She's got your eyes. His father looked up. She's going to be, I think, very good at reading people, Adrian said. She already does it. She sits with a new situation before she commits to it. She assesses, she decides, then she goes in fully. Sound familiar? Victor's jaw tightened, but differently than it usually did. Not with resistance, with something else. I would like, Victor said carefully, to meet her. If that is something that would be considered. Adrian looked at his father. At the 73-year-old man who had built an empire with the tools of ambition and distance and had spent so long using them that he'd stopped noticing what they were costing. It's not my decision to make alone, Adrian said. Claire would have a voice in it, a significant one. Of course. And it would be slow. It would be very slow. I understand. And you would have to be someone other than the person who put documents on a desk last week. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm aware. The food arrived, they ate. The conversation shifted to other things, mundane things. The texture of two people trying something new without quite knowing the name for what they're trying. It wasn't resolution. It was a door barely open, casting a narrow line of light into a room that had been dark for a long time. Some doors, Adrian was learning, opened slowly. The important ones, especially. He told Claire that night by text. Short. Factual. Victor asked about meeting Lily. I told him it was your decision, no pressure in any direction. She didn't respond immediately. He didn't expect her to. She texted back at 10:47. I'll think about it. He put his phone down and sat in the quiet of his apartment. The same penthouse, the same floor-to-ceiling glass, the same skyline he'd stared at on the night of the storm 4 months ago. But it looked different now, or he looked at it differently.
The city below was not an abstract measure of his standing in the world. It was the city where his daughter lived, where Claire navigated her days with the particular competence of someone who had built a life in the margins and made it hold, where, on a cold November night, a car had taken a wrong turn in the rain. He thought about the reading light, on, off, on. He thought about Rain the rabbit tucked under Lily's arm in a hospital bed. He thought about Claire's voice saying, "She said my name and then she said yours." He had spent the better part of his adult life being the kind of man who knew exactly where he stood in any room and exactly what he was worth in any transaction and exactly how to close the gap between what he had and what he wanted through the application of intelligence and will. He didn't know exactly where he stood now. He didn't know how this was going to go. He realized, going to have to learn to be someone who could tolerate not knowing, who could stay in the not knowing without turning it into a strategy or an exit. He sat with the city and the not knowing and did not reach for his phone. Outside, it was starting to snow. The first real snow of the season, coming down in the specific slow way of snow that intends to stay. Large, soft, accumulating. The kind that turned the city quiet for a few hours in a way that nothing else did. Lily, he thought, was going to want to be outside in it by 6 in the morning. He knew this about her now. He knew the shape of her delight. He knew what she'd say when she saw it. Not words exactly at first, just the sound she made. Then snow and cold and twirly, because snow coming down looked, he supposed, like a kind of spinning. He stayed at the window until the street below was white. He was still there at midnight, watching it fall. The snow that had started falling on Wednesday night was still on the ground Friday morning, compacted now into the grayish-white slush that Manhattan produced within 48 hours of any snowfall. The city's particular talent for converting the beautiful into the functional and then into the inconvenient. Lily thought it was still magnificent. She stood at the window of Claire's apartment in her pajamas, with her nose pressed against the glass, and provided a running commentary on the street below with the authority of someone filing an official report. A man with a yellow scarf, a dog wearing boots, a taxi that sprayed slush onto the curb in a way she found both alarming and interesting. More snow, she told Adrian, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee Claire had made him without being asked, which he had noted and not commented on. There's a lot of it, he agreed. Why? Because clouds held on to it and then let go. She considered this with her nose still on the glass. Why? That's what clouds do with cold water. A pause. I like it. I know you do. She turned from his window and looked at him with the direct, unfiltered assessment she occasionally performed, the one that made him feel, despite everything, like he was being evaluated by someone whose opinion genuinely mattered. You stay? She asked. He looked at Claire, who was moving between the kitchen counter and the dining table with the morning efficiency of someone running a small household on a schedule. She had heard the question. She didn't look up, but she didn't leave the room either. I have to go to work this morning, he said, but I'll see you Thursday. Lily processed this. Okay, she said, in the tone of someone accepting a practical reality while reserving judgment on whether it was the correct arrangement. She turned back to the window. Claire appeared at his elbow and refilled his coffee without asking. She does that, Claire said quietly, not really to him, more to the air between them. She asks who's staying every morning. She's been doing it since she was about 2. I think she's cataloging who her people are. And? Claire looked at him. The morning light was doing something complicated to her face, showing the tiredness but also something underneath it that had been slowly surfacing over these months. Something that was cautiously deciding to exist. And you're on the list, she said, simply. Then she went back to the kitchen. He sat with his coffee and the weight of that small sentence and Lily's nose print on the window glass, and felt the particular quality of a life that was not the one he had planned, and was, in ways he was still learning to measure, better. February arrived, and with it a set of complications nobody had scheduled. The first was professional. The Singapore Fund, after 3 months of delicate positioning, suddenly accelerated its timeline. The lead partner, a careful, methodical man named Wen, who communicated primarily through implication, sent a message through channels that could only be read as, formalize the succession or we reconsider the allocation. The amount at stake was significant enough that even Adrian, who had become increasingly philosophical about numbers, felt the pressure of it. He spent the first 2 weeks of February in an extended negotiation that kept him in the office until 10 most nights and produced 3 distinct versions of a restructuring proposal, each of which his father reviewed and returned with amendments that were simultaneously reasonable and quietly pointed. He didn't miss a Thursday. He was tired for some of them, arrived at the playground or the coffee shop with the specific grayed-out quality of someone running on insufficient sleep and too much structured conversation. But he came. And Lily, with the adaptability Claire had always said she had, simply incorporated his tiredness into her understanding of him. On a Thursday in mid-February, when he arrived looking like he'd had 4 hours of sleep, she studied his face and said, "You need juice." I need something," he agreed. She shared her apple juice with him with great ceremony. Claire watched this transaction with the particular expression she'd been wearing more frequently since January. Not quite a smile, not quite something heavier, but the territory between them that was slowly resolving into something he was beginning to allow himself to identify. The second complication was unexpected. It came in the form of a phone call from a woman named Patricia Hollis, who identified herself as a partner at a family law firm, and who stated, with the professional neutrality of someone delivering a procedural notification, that she was calling on behalf of Victor Mercer regarding a request to formalize Adrian's parental status and establish a legal framework for his involvement in Lily's life. Adrian heard this and said, "My father called you." "Mr. Victor Mercer's office initiated contact, yes." He sat in his car outside a midtown building for a long moment after the call ended. His father had called a family law firm, not to limit his involvement, to formalize it, to create legal structure around the very thing he'd spent the last several months trying to document out of existence. He called Victor. "You hired a family lawyer," he said when his father picked up. "I engaged a firm to review the options," Victor said. "You should have formal parental rights. Whatever I've thought about the arrangement, the child should have her father's name on the correct documents. That's not sentiment, that's responsibility. That's a significant reversal of the documents from last month." A pause. "Yes." Adrian let the silence sit for a moment. "What changed?" Another pause, longer. Victor Mercer did not, as a rule, answer this type of question directly. He was a man who communicated through action and position and the careful arrangement of information, not through the examination of internal states. But he said, "I had lunch with someone." "Who?" "A man I've known for 40 years, Gerald Farrow. He has 3 adult children." A pause. "None of them came to his wife's funeral last year, not one." Another pause. "I was there. I saw the front row." Adrian said nothing. "Engage the firm," Victor said, "or use your own. It doesn't matter. Just get it done properly." He hung up. Adrian sat in his car for another minute, processing the information that his father had, in his particular oblique way, undergone something that looked very much like a reckoning, delivered not through conversation or confession, but through the image of a man sitting alone in the front row of his wife's funeral because he'd built something and called it success. He texted Claire, "Need to talk to you about something when you have time. Not urgent, but important." She replied 20 minutes later, "Tomorrow after Lily's nap, around 2. Yet, he arrived at 2:05 with 2 coffees because it was the kind of thing he did now, automatically, without calculating it. Claire opened the door and looked at the cups and took one and stepped back to let him in. Lily was asleep. The apartment had the particular quiet of a space containing one sleeping child. Not silence exactly, but a hush that everyone in it instinctively honored. They sat at the kitchen table. He told her about the lawyer, about his father's call, about Gerald Farrow and the empty front row. He told it plainly, without framing it as a win or a turning point, because he'd learned that Claire responded to plain information better than to shaped narratives. She listened with her hands around her coffee cup and her eyes on the table between them. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Why do you think he changed?" she asked. "I think he saw something that scared him. Not in a dramatic way, just clearly. Gerald Farrow's family." "Yes." "You think that's all it took? One funeral?" "I think the funeral clarified something that had been building for a while," he said. "The lunch we had.
The things I said about being 10 years old when he went to London. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I think he's been doing a slow accounting and he didn't like the numbers. Claire looked at the window. Outside, the February street was gray and wet, the last of the snow now entirely converted to inconvenience. Adrian, she said, still looking at the window, there's something I need to say to you, and I've been deciding for about 2 weeks whether to say it. He waited. She turned to look at him. Her expression was the careful, still one, all instruments active. When you left, she said, when we divorced, I told myself a story about it for a long time. The story was that you made a choice, and the choice was the firm, and your father, and the life you were building, and that I and whatever we might have had simply didn't fit that picture. She paused. That story was mostly true, but not entirely. What was the part that wasn't true? The part where I was entirely a passive recipient of your decision. She said it steadily, looking at him. I knew you were scared. I could see it. Not about fatherhood in general. I could see it was specific. It was about your father, about the pattern. And I was so hurt and so tired of waiting for you to be present that I didn't try to reach that part of you. I made it your problem entirely, and I let you solve it the way scared people solve things, which is by leaving. She paused. I'm not saying the outcome was my fault. I'm saying I wasn't without choices either, and I made some of them out of pride. He was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Because you've been honest with me for 4 months. About the documents, about your father, about what you feel. She kept his gaze. And I've been careful, managed, and that's appropriate, given everything. But it started to feel like I was asking something of you that I wasn't willing to do myself. She picked up her coffee. So, that's the thing I needed to say. He sat with it. I wasn't entirely reachable, he said. You couldn't have reached something I was working very hard to keep below the surface. Maybe not, but I could have tried differently. Claire. He waited until she was looking at him. We were both 29. We had not figured out the things we know now. That's not negligence. That's just where we were. She looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded once with the specific motion of someone putting a weight down. I know, she said. I just needed to say it. I'm glad you did. The quiet of the sleeping child apartment settled around them. Outside, a truck went by, audible through the glass. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. The legal thing, Claire said. The parental rights formalization. Whatever you want. Your lawyers, my lawyers, whatever feels right to you. I'm not pushing a timeline. I want it done. She said it directly. I want Lily to have the right documentation. I want her to have your name on the forms that matter. Not for you. For her. She paused. She's going to be old enough soon to understand what documents mean. I want hers to reflect the truth of what's actually happening. Okay? I'll call my attorney this week. Okay. She stood to rinse her cup. He stood too. Stay, she said, without turning from the sink, for when she wakes up. She'll want to tell you about the dream she was having when she went down. She was very specific about it, involving a purple elephant and a situation she described as complicated. He felt something move in his chest that had become familiar over these months, but hadn't lost its particular quality. I'll stay, he said. The parental rights process took 6 weeks and involved, as legal processes do, considerably more paperwork than seemed proportionate to the human reality it was trying to document. Claire's attorney was a precise, no-nonsense woman named Sandra, who made it clear at the first meeting that she was representing Lily's interests above all else, and that Adrian should understand that distinction. I understand, he said. Good. She looked at him over her glasses in a way that suggested she'd heard that sentence many times and found it a useful starting point rather than a conclusion. Let's begin. He liked her immediately. The process moved. There were meetings and reviews and one conversation between attorneys that apparently involved some heated language about historical support obligations, the resolution of which required Adrian to write a check that was larger than he'd anticipated and that he did not complain about to anyone, including himself, because the complaint would have been ridiculous and he knew it. Claire found out about the check when Sandra called her to confirm the resolution.
She called Adrian that evening.
You didn't tell me the number, she said. No. Why not? Because it was going to happen regardless, and telling you the number would have made you feel like you were supposed to say something about it, and there's nothing to say about it. A pause. Adrian, it's a historical obligation. Sandra was right about the framing. It happened, and it's done. A longer pause. Thank you, Claire said. Very quietly, not performatively, just the word, with its full weight. You're welcome. Another pause, different from the others, the kind that has something in it. Do you want to have dinner? She said. Not a thing, just dinner, the three of us. I'm making pasta on Friday, and Lily has been asking for you on Thursdays again, and I thought, yes, he said. Okay. He could hear in her voice that she was managing something, that the invitation had cost something to make. Friday, 7. Bring bread or something. I'll bring bread. Don't bring expensive bread.
She doesn't know the difference, and it'll be wasted.
I'll bring regular bread.
Good. A beat. Okay, Friday. She hung up. He stood in his kitchen and looked at his phone and did not try to identify or analyze or assess what was happening. He just let it be what it was. Friday dinner was pasta. Spiral, as required. Lily sat in her booster seat and ate with the focused determination of someone for whom food was a serious undertaking, periodically reporting on the pasta's quality in terms that were evaluative but not yet fully linguistic. Adrian sat across from her. Claire moved between the kitchen and the table in the efficient back and forth of a person who cooked in a small space and had organized it precisely. They talked about ordinary things. Lily's new daycare teacher, who she described as tall. A movie Claire had watched the night before and found disappointing. A situation at Adrian's firm involving a printer that had failed at a moment of maximum inconvenience and produced a panic disproportionate to its actual stakes. The printer, Claire said, 300 pages into a 400-page document at 8 in the morning before a 10 o'clock presentation. What did you do? I called the building's other office on the 6th floor, explained the situation, and used their printer. They were a dental practice. Very accommodating. Claire laughed. Not the short, surprised laugh of the playground, but a full one, the kind that came from actual amusement at actual things. Lily looked up from her pasta at the sound of her mother laughing and decided, apparently, that this was the correct atmosphere, and laughed too, without knowing at what. "Dat funny," she announced. "It was a little funny," Claire said. "Printer," Lily said, with great authority, and returned to her pasta. After dinner, Adrian washed up while Claire put Lily through the bath and pajama sequence that ended the day. He could hear them from the kitchen. The running water. Lily's opinions on the temperature. Claire's patient negotiation about shampoo. The sounds of a household at the end of its day. He dried the pasta pot and put it on the counter and stood in Claire's small kitchen looking at the drawings on the refrigerator. There were maybe 12 of them, held by mismatched magnets, ranging in apparent age and in Lily's developing technical command. The most recent ones were identifiable. A person with large round eyes that he was fairly sure was Claire, a smaller person beside her, and in the newest drawing, with a more deliberate hand, a third figure, taller, dark scribbled hair. He looked at that third figure for a while. Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway. "She's down." Took 40 minutes to negotiate the pajama choice, which was my fault for giving her options. The spiral pasta rule extends to pajamas. The spiral pasta rule extends to everything. She's my daughter. She looked at him by the refrigerator, saw where he was looking. Her expression shifted. "She did that last week," Claire said. I didn't tell you to manage your feelings about it, which I realize now was probably the wrong call." "I would have wanted to know," he said. "I know, I'm still—" She stopped, started differently. "I'm still learning how to include you in things. I spent almost 3 years not including you, and the habit is—" She exhaled. "It's a habit. I know. I'm working on it. I know that too." She moved to the counter and leaned against it, arms crossed in the not defensive way, the thinking way. He recognized the posture. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer it honestly without thinking about what the best strategic answer is. Just the first true thing." Okay. When you think about this, she gestured at the kitchen, the apartment, the sounds of a settled child. When you think about this as a life, not a Thursday arrangement, not a co-parenting framework, this, the dinner and the pasta and the drawings on the refrigerator. She looked at him steadily. What do you think? He looked at the third figure on the refrigerator, the dark scribbled hair. I think it's what I want, he said. That's the first true thing. She held his gaze for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. I need more time, she said. I'm not going anywhere. I know you say that. I mean it. I know you mean it right now. She uncrossed her arms. What I don't know yet is whether you'll mean it in 2 years. Whether this life, the actual texture of it, the pasta negotiations and the printer crises and the Lily has a fever Tuesday nights, whether that's what you want or whether what you want is the idea of it. He thought about the honest answer. I don't know how to prove that in advance, he said. I can only keep showing up until the advance becomes the past, and you can look at it and see the pattern. She nodded slowly. That's the right answer, she said. I didn't want a speech. I wanted the honest version. She pushed off the counter. You should go, it's late. It is. He put on his jacket. She walked him to the door. The apartment was quiet around them, Lily asleep in the back, the drawings on the refrigerator, the drying rack in the corner that had become furniture. At the door, he stopped. Claire. He looked at her. Thank you for Friday. Thank you for the bread. A pause. It was the right bread. Regular bread. Exactly right. He left. Walking to the car in the February cold, he thought about what she'd said. I need more time. 3 of the most important words in the English language when they came from the right person and meant what she meant them to mean. She wasn't closing the door. She was telling him the door was open and she wasn't ready to walk through it yet. He could wait. He was learning to wait for important things, which was, he understood now, a skill he had never developed because he had never before encountered something important enough to make the waiting feel worthwhile. Victor met Lily for the first time on a Saturday in March. It had taken 2 more weeks of conversation, careful, unhurried conversation between Adrian and Claire, with Sandra, the attorney consulted on exactly 0 of it because this wasn't a legal question, to arrive at the logistics. Not a formal meeting, not at Victor's office or at any space that carried his authority. A park. The same Chelsea playground with the blue climbing structure that had become familiar territory. Claire had been clear about the conditions. Victor would be introduced as Adrian's father. Lily would not be instructed on what to call him. She would find her own word for him in her own time. If at any point Claire felt the situation was not right, it ended. No argument, no negotiation. Victor had agreed to all of this. Adrian had relayed the terms, expecting at least minor pushback, and received none. Fine, his father had said, whatever she needs. It was the whatever she needs that told Adrian something had genuinely shifted. Victor arrived at the playground first, which was unexpected. Adrian had told him 11 o'clock, and Victor was there at 10:50, sitting on the bench Adrian usually occupied, in a coat that was somewhat more casual than his usual register. He was looking at the climbing structure with the expression of a man in foreign territory who is not going to show that he is in foreign territory. Adrian arrived at 10:58. His father looked up. You're early, Adrian said. So are you. They stood together by the bench. The park was busy. Saturday morning, cold but bright, the specific energy of children who have been indoor for a week and are spending it all at once. She's going to look at you the way she looks at everything new, Adrian said. She'll assess you for a while before she decides. You mentioned she's systematic. Yes. She gets that from somewhere, Victor said. He said it neutrally. They both understood what he meant. At 11:04, the gate opened and Claire came through with Lily on her hip. Lily was in her red coat. Rain, the rabbit, was in her coat pocket with its wooden head visible. She was looking at the climbing structure already. Adrian went to meet them. He and Claire exchanged a brief look, her asking without words, him answering the same way, the specific shorthand of 2 people who have spent enough time managing shared complexity that they no longer need full sentences for all of it. He walked with them to the bench. Lily, he said, this is my dad. His name is Victor. Lily looked at Victor with the full, unblinking assessment. Victor, to his credit, looked back. He did not perform warmth. He was not a man who performed anything particularly well, but he did not retreat into authority either. He simply sat and looked at her and waited. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she held up Rain. "Dis is Rain," she said. Victor looked at the rabbit. "Rain is a good name for a rabbit," he said. His voice was slightly different from his usual register. Quieter, more careful. Lily considered whether this answer was satisfactory. Apparently it was, because she climbed down from Claire's hip and walked to the climbing structure. Victor watched her go. Adrian, standing beside his father, did not say anything. He watched his father watch his daughter with the expression of a 73-year-old man encountering something he didn't have prepared language for, which was, Adrian thought, probably the most honest he'd ever looked. Claire sat on the far end of the bench. She was watching Victor with the careful, instruments-active expression, not warmly, not coldly, evaluating. After a few minutes, Victor said, to no one in particular, "She's quick." "Very," Claire said. Victor turned to look at her. Claire held his gaze. The weight of their history, the settlement pressure, the early conversations, the document on the desk, sat in the air between them without either of them naming it. "I made errors in judgment," Victor said, "regarding you and Lily." He said it the way he said everything, without inflection, without performance, like a statement of operational fact. "I'm not asking for anything in exchange for saying that." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "Adrian told me you were different from what I expected." A pause. "I wasn't sure I believed him. And now?" She looked at the climbing structure where Lily was narrating something to the top rung. "Now I'm reserving judgment." She turned back to Victor. "Which is more than you got from me 6 months ago. So consider it progress." Something shifted in Victor's face that was not quite what Adrian had seen in the Midtown restaurant, but related to it. Something that was finding, slowly, the shape of humility. "Fair," Victor said. Lily came back at high speed, skidded to a stop in front of Victor, and held up Rain again. "You hold," she said. It was not a request. Victor looked down at Rain the rabbit. He reached out and took it with both hands, carefully, the way he would have taken something valuable and fragile in a professional context. Lily watched to confirm he was holding it correctly. Then she turned and ran back to the structure. Victor looked at the rabbit in his hands. He looked at it for a long time. Adrian sat on the bench beside his father and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would improve on what had just happened. Claire was looking at the climbing structure, her expression the one he'd been learning to read. The careful, open one, the one that was deciding to stay open. The three of them sat on the bench in the cold March sun and watched Lily climb and descend and climb again. Holding her own counsel, handing off Rain when she needed her hands free and collecting him when she was done. Managing her world with the confident precision of a person who has never had reason to believe the people around her would fail to show up. It was, Adrian thought, the most important meeting he'd attended in his professional life. And nobody was wearing a suit. April came the way April always does in New York. Badly, at first, with cold rain and late fits of winter, and then suddenly warmly, like the season had been sitting just behind the door and finally pushed through. He and Claire had dinner 3 more times in March, once at her apartment, twice at restaurants, small neighborhood places, not the midtown establishments of his professional life, but the kind of restaurants that took reservations for 5 days out and had menus written on paper and served bread without being asked. They talked like people who were finding each other again, not retrieving the marriage, which was a different thing, but finding the person underneath the history. The things they'd been too defended to know in the first years and too separated to discover after. He learned that she had started writing again. Not for work, personal writing, essays, things she kept in a document she hadn't shown anyone. He didn't ask to see them. She told him about them the way people tell you about things they're not ready to share, but need someone to know exist. She learned that he had, in the last 6 months, stopped accepting certain kinds of clients. Not dramatically, not as a stated policy, but as a quiet accumulation of declined meetings with people whose business practices he had previously accommodated in the name of professional pragmatism. Diane had noticed and not said anything. His father had noticed and asked once and accepted the answer. "What's the threshold?" Claire asked, the second dinner out. "How do you decide?" "I ask myself if I'd tell Lily about it when she's 15, he said. "If the answer is no, I don't take it." She looked at him across the restaurant table. "That's a good threshold. It's a useful one." He paused. "She's going to be the kind of 15-year-old who asks." "She absolutely is." They were quiet for a moment, sharing the specific comfortable quality of two people who know the same person well. "Adrian," Claire said. He looked at her. "I think I'm getting there," she said, quietly, the way she said things that cost something. He understood what she meant. He didn't ask for clarification or expansion or a definition of there. He just nodded. "I know," he said. "I'm not saying—" "I know you're not. I heard exactly what you said." She looked at him across the table. The restaurant moved around them in its ordinary evening way. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They finished dinner. He walked her home. At the green awning, she stopped and turned to him, and he looked at her in the April evening, and she looked at him, and neither of them moved toward the other or away. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he confirmed. She went inside. He walked back toward the main street with his hands in his jacket pockets and the specific, unfamiliar quality of something building rather than closing, a direction rather than an outcome. The city was warm for April, and the sidewalks were full of people doing the thing New Yorkers do when temperature finally cooperates, being outside with the slightly dazed gratitude of the recently released. He walked farther than he needed to before he found a cab. He wasn't in a hurry to end the evening. He was not, he understood, in a hurry for any of it anymore. This was new. This was, he thought, what it felt like to be someone who has decided that being present was not a sacrifice but a choice, and had started, against all prior programming, to choose it. Lily's drawing on the refrigerator, the third figure with the dark, scribbled hair. He was on the list of people she was checking for every morning. He intended to make sure she found him there. Spring came fully in May, the way it occasionally did in New York, not tentatively but all at once, as though the city had made a decision and committed to it. The trees along the Chelsea side streets went from bare to green in what felt like a single week. Windows that had been sealed since October opened. The playground on 24th filled up in the afternoons with a density of children and parents that made the bench situation competitive. Adrian arrived on a Thursday in mid-May to find Lily already at the top of the climbing structure, delivering what appeared to be a speech to the assembled playground below. He couldn't hear the content from the gate, but the delivery had authority. Claire was on the bench with a coffee and the expression of someone who had been listening to the speech for a while and found it both impressive and exhausting. "What's the topic?" he asked, sitting beside her. "The correct way to go down a slide, I think. But it may have expanded into general policy." She handed him the second coffee she'd brought without announcing she was going to bring it. It had become, over the last several months, a thing she did. "She's been up there for 6 minutes." "The speech? Or the climbing?" "The total enterprise." He watched Lily gesture with one arm at the slide below her. A smaller child at the bottom of the structure was listening with apparent genuine interest. "She's going to be in politics or running something," Claire said. "I haven't decided which is worse. She could run something political." "That's the nightmare scenario, yes." They sat with their coffees in the May warmth and watched their daughter reform the playground's operational procedures and the ease of it, the specific ease of two people who had learned how to sit together again without performance, was something Adrian had stopped trying to measure and started just letting be what it was. He had been doing that more lately, letting things be what they were rather than assessing their position on a trajectory. It was harder than it sounded for a man who had spent his entire career thinking in trajectories. "I need to tell you something," Claire said. She said it in the way she'd learned to say things that cost something, directly, without preamble, giving him the sentence he needed to brace for the next one. He looked at her. "I accepted the coordinator position," she said, "the larger organization. It starts in September." He waited to see if there was more. "It's a significant step up, better pay, better resources, real creative autonomy." She looked at her coffee. "The commute is longer.
Midtown instead of a 10-minute walk. I'll need to adjust the childcare arrangement. What does that look like? More days at the center. A later pickup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. A pause. I wanted to tell you because the Thursday timing might need to shift. We can work around it, he said. Whatever the schedule needs. She nodded. He could see that she had prepared for this conversation to be harder, for some version of the old Adrian to surface and treat the adjustment as an inconvenience to his calendar. The absence of that friction was still something she had to recalibrate to. I'm proud of you, he said. She looked at him. The job, he said. You've been building towards something like this for 3 years on a budget and a schedule and without any help that you asked for. He paused. It's a real thing. Claire was quiet for a moment. Not the processing quiet, a different one. The kind that comes when something lands that you didn't realize you needed. Thank you, she said. From the climbing structure, look at me. They both looked. Lily had apparently concluded the policy speech and was now demonstrating the slide in the manner she had just prescribed, which involved arms out and a very straight back. She landed at the bottom, looked at the bench, confirmed they had witnessed it, and went back up. I have something to tell you, too, Adrian said. Claire looked at him. I've been in conversation with Hartwell University's business school for about 2 months. They've offered me an adjunct position, ethics and investment management, 1 seminar per week, a curriculum I'd design. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Starting in the fall. She stared at him. You're going to teach. 1 class. I'm not leaving the firm, but I want to. I want to do something that isn't purely extractive, where what I know goes somewhere other than a fund allocation. He paused. And I want to model something for students who are where I was at 25, before I had decided that everything personal was a liability. Claire held his gaze for a long moment. Did you plan this? She asked. To tell me on the same day I told you about the job? No. It just happened that way. She looked at him steadily. Then she looked at the playground, at Lily going up the stairs again with the methodical determination that characterized everything she did. We're different people, Claire said quietly, than we were. Yes. I keep waiting for that to feel strange, and it keeps feeling... She stopped. What? She turned to look at him. The May light was doing what light did in May in the city, making everything slightly more visible than it had been all winter, showing the colors that the gray months had been keeping to themselves. Right, she said. It keeps feeling right. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them had to say anything after that. He proposed in June, not with planning, exactly, or not with the kind of planning he would have brought to a professional decision, which involved contingencies and optics and the management of information. He proposed the way things had been happening between them for months now, honestly, at an ordinary moment, without the architecture of performance. They were in Claire's kitchen. He had come for dinner and stayed late, and Lily was asleep, and they were sitting on opposite ends of the couch with a documentary neither of them was fully watching. At some point during the second hour, Claire had moved to put her feet up, and her position had migrated by degrees until she was leaning against his side. He had not moved. She had not moved. The documentary concluded something about migratory birds. He said, I want to marry you again. She didn't startle. She didn't pull away. After a moment, she said, That's a very quiet proposal. It's a true one. She was quiet. He didn't feel it. Tell me what you mean by it, she said. Not what you feel, what you mean, what it would look like. He thought about it. It means I want to live in the same place as you and Lily, he said. Not the penthouse. I'll sell it, or we can sell it, whatever you want. Something that has a yard if we can find a yard in this city or just outside it. It means I want to be the person who hears her ask who's staying and is there when she checks. He paused. It means I know who I am now in a way I didn't the first time, and I know who you are, and I don't want to keep living in separate apartments. Claire sat with that for a long time. You mentioned a yard, she said finally. I did. Lily would lose her mind over a yard. I thought about that. She'd be out there at 6 in the morning, in all weather. I factored that in. pause. She'd build things. She builds things now with anything available. Sticks, rocks, whatever she can find at the playground. A yard would be... Claire stopped. He could feel her breathing change slightly, the specific rhythm of someone doing something that cost something. She'd have a place to build things. Yes, he said. Adrian. She shifted to look at him. Her face, in the low light of the living room, was the face of a woman who had carried a long time and was trying to decide if it was safe to put some of it down. If I say yes to this, if we do this, we don't get to fail at it the same way. I know. Not the same way, she repeated. Other ways, probably. We'll get things wrong, but not the specific failure of you becoming unavailable and me becoming too proud to say I need you here. Agreed. I need you to be able to hear me when I tell you that I need you present, not as a performance, not as a concession, as the actual thing. I can do that. You're better at it than you were. I see that. She held his gaze. But better, and there aren't the same thing yet. I know, I'm still closing the gap. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not know what the answer was going to be, and he did not try to read it. Okay, she said. He waited. Yes, she said. I'll marry you again. She said it without dramatics, which was how she said everything that mattered. But we're doing it small, just us and Lily and whoever we actually care about. I don't want an event. Whatever you want. And you're selling the penthouse. Already planned to. And if you miss a Thursday without a real reason, I'm going to be extremely unhappy about it. Understood. She put her head back against his shoulder. He put his arm around her and they sat with the television dark and the city doing its city things outside and Lily asleep in the back room, making the apartment into the particular shape of home that had been slowly forming all year. He sat in that shape and felt, for the first time in as long as he could accurately remember, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because everything was resolved, not because the hard parts were over. There would be arguments about logistics and money and parenting philosophy and the relentless negotiation of two people with strong opinions trying to build a shared life. He knew this. He wasn't constructing an illusion, but he was here, and he knew how to be here now. And that was the difference that made every other difference possible. The wedding was in August, 11 months after a car had taken a wrong turn in the rain. They did it in Riverside Park on a Saturday morning, the light the particular gold of August in New York before it got too hot, the Hudson visible through the trees. 12 people. Claire's sister and her husband, who had made the trip from Philadelphia. Diane, who received the invitation with the composed grace of someone who had been wondering for months if this was coming. Sandra, the attorney, because Claire had wanted her there, which said something about what had happened over the course of 6 months of paperwork. 2 of Claire's friends from the arts nonprofit, Marcus the driver, who had been at the wheel on the night of the storm, and who accepted his invitation with a quiet formality that told Adrian he understood exactly what he was being included in. And Victor. Victor stood near the back of the small gathering in a suit that was slightly more conservative than his usual. He had made, Adrian noticed, a deliberate effort at what he probably understood as accessible, and he held Rain the rabbit for the duration of the ceremony because Lily had arrived in her yellow dress, taken one look at the proceedings, determined that this was a situation requiring her to have both hands free, and passed Rain to the nearest available person without ceremony. Victor held that wooden rabbit with both hands for 40 minutes and did not appear to find this undignified. The ceremony was short. A friend of Claire's officiated. They wrote their own words, which they hadn't shared with each other in advance because that had been Claire's idea, and she was right about it. She was right about most things in her quiet, consistent way. When it was his turn, Adrian said, "I spent a long time believing that the most important thing I could build was something that lasted after I was gone. A firm, a legacy, a name that meant something in the rooms where decisions get made. I was wrong about what the building was for." He looked at Claire. He looked at Lily, who was investigating a bird nearby with characteristic focus. The thing worth building is the thing that needs you present to hold it together. Not money, not a name, just you, actually there, when it matters. I know how to do that now. I didn't always. I'm going to spend the rest of my life being grateful that I got a second chance to learn it. Claire's words were shorter.
She had always been economical when things mattered most. "I know who you are now," she said. "Not the version of you I hoped for or the version I feared. I know the actual person, and I'm choosing him." She paused. Again, with full information. A small laugh from somewhere in the group. Claire almost smiled. The moment they were asked to confirm the choice, Lily abandoned the bird investigation, walked between them, and took one hand from each of them, standing between her parents in her yellow dress, with the calm authority of someone who had been waiting for this particular arrangement to become official. There was not a person in that small group under the August trees who was not doing something complicated with their face. Victor stood at the back holding Rain the rabbit and looked at his son standing with his daughter between them and his new wife beside him, and something in his expression was the furthest thing from the man who had slid documents across a mahogany desk with 2 fingers. Something in his expression was what grief looked like when it arrived too late to prevent what was lost, and just early enough to see what could still be saved. The house took 4 months to find. Not in Manhattan, they looked, and the math did not work in the way of family house math in Manhattan, which is to say it worked numerically and didn't work in any other sense. They found it in a town in Westchester, 40 minutes by train, close enough to the city to feel connected, and far enough that the street outside had trees that had been there for 60 years in a yard with actual dirt. Lily walked into that yard for the first time on a Saturday in October, 2 months after the wedding, stood in the center of it, turned in a slow circle, and said, "Mine." Not our yard, not the yard, just mine. Claire looked at Adrian. He looked back at her. "Technically ours," Claire said. "Mine," Lily said, clearly considering this a settled matter. They did not argue the point. The house itself was older than it looked and needed things that houses needed after 20 years of occupancy. A kitchen remodel, floors refinished in the back rooms, a heating system that the inspector had described with the careful language of someone choosing not to say replacement required but meaning it. Adrian was better at funding renovations than executing them. Claire was better at decisions about what the space actually needed. They argued about the kitchen cabinets for 10 days with the specific energy of 2 people who have very strong opinions and have agreed to be honest about them. They chose white. Claire's call. He conceded with less difficulty than he expected, which he privately considered evidence of personal growth. Lily immediately designated a corner of the yard as her building area. By November, she had accumulated a significant collection of sticks, rocks, several pieces of bark, 2 plastic containers from the recycling, and a plan she explained at length but which remained largely architectural in her own head. He built her a workbench. Not a children's toy workbench, a real one, low to the ground, with a vise and actual tools scaled for small hands. He built it himself on a Saturday in October, following plans he found online and executing them with the focused attention of someone for whom the outcome mattered more than the competence. It was not a perfect workbench. One leg was slightly shorter than the others, and he'd had to shim it with a piece of scrap wood. The vise was slightly off-center. Lily loved it without reservation. She stood at it the morning after he installed it and organized her collected materials along the surface with the systematic precision of a person beginning serious work. Rain the rabbit was positioned at the far left corner, apparently serving as some kind of project supervisor. "It's good," she told Adrian, in the assessing tone she used for things she'd decided to officially approve. "I'm glad. The leg is wobbly." "I know. I shimmied it." She looked at the shim. "Okay," she said, accepting this as a reasonable response to an imperfect situation, and got back to her work. Claire, standing in the yard doorway with a coffee, looked at the scene, the lopsided workbench, the child already deeply engaged, the man who had built it crouching nearby. And her expression was the one he'd been learning to read for the better part of a year, not the careful one, the open one, the one that had decided to stay open. "Come inside," she said. "Breakfast." 5 minutes, Lily said, without looking up. "That's what you said 20 minutes ago." 5 more minutes. Claire looked at Adrian with the expression that said, "This is what you signed up for." He looked back with the expression that said, I know exactly." He went inside for breakfast. Lily remained at the workbench for 40 minutes and came in with dirt on her hands and a specific plan that she explained over her spiral pasta. Victor came on a Sunday in December. He'd been to the house twice before, once in October to see the renovation progress, once in November for a dinner that had been, by anyone's standard, awkward in the specific way of people learning new configurations of relationship. But December was different. December had the Christmas market on the town's main street, and Lily had been told about this market and had been treating the information as a top priority project for approximately 2 weeks. He arrived with 2 bags, one that turned out to contain a very good bottle of wine, and one that contained, when Lily investigated it with her usual customs inspection approach, a large wooden building set with more pieces than Adrian had ever seen in a children's toy. Lily opened the box, looked at the quantity of pieces, looked at Victor. "We build this?" she said. "If you want to," Victor said. "Now?" "Lily," Claire said. "We haven't even had lunch." "After lunch," Victor said. "We build it after lunch." Lily looked at him steadily, assessing whether this was a firm commitment or a parental deflection. "You promise?" she said. Something in Victor's face did the thing it had been doing more frequently over these months. The involuntary movement, the thing that appeared when Lily treated him with her particular brand of direct, uncomplicated expectation, which made no allowance for the complexity of who he'd been before she knew him. She just wanted to know if he was going to show up. "Yes," he said, "I promise." After lunch, they built it. Victor and Lily on the living room floor for an hour and 40 minutes. With Lily directing and Victor following directions with the focused seriousness of a man who had run a billion-dollar firm and was now correctly identifying this as work of equal importance. Adrian sat on the couch. Claire sat beside him. They watched. At one point, Victor showed Lily how to sort the pieces by size before beginning, which was clearly a systems thinking instinct he was applying to what he had on hand. Lily immediately adopted this approach, as if she'd always known it. "She's going to run everything," Claire said quietly, watching. "She already is," Adrian said. Claire leaned slightly against his side. He put his arm around her. Outside the December window, the town's main street had its Christmas lights on, and the quality of the afternoon light was the specific gold of December at 4 o'clock, which lasted about an hour before the dark came. He sat in that hour. He had been thinking about a question lately, the kind of question that had no clean answer but kept presenting itself in the margins of ordinary days. He'd been trying to identify what he actually believed about how people changed, whether they genuinely became different or simply redistributed what was already there. Whether a man who had been his father's son for 41 years and afraid of failure and unable to be present for the people who needed him could actually, in the span of a year, become someone else. He had arrived at the only honest answer he could find, which was both. He was still himself. The hypervigilance, the calculation, the instinct to manage rather than feel, those didn't go away. They showed up on hard days and in difficult conversations, and in the moments when something scared him and his first impulse was still to build a wall rather than open a door. But he had learned to notice them, and noticing, he had discovered, was not the same as being controlled by them. The noticing created a gap, small, sometimes very small, between the impulse and the action. And in that gap, he could make a different choice. That was what the year had actually taught him. Not transformation, not the clean arc of becoming a better man, just the small, daily, imperfect practice of noticing the gap and choosing differently. You couldn't do it once and be done with it. You had to do it again every day. You had to do it when you were tired and when the old habits were louder than the new ones, and when the work of being present felt less glamorous than anything anyone would make a movie about. It was the least heroic kind of change. It was also, he thought, the only kind that held. In February, 14 months after a rainy night and a wrong turn, and a woman under an overhang and a child laughing at rain, Claire told him she was pregnant. She told him on a Tuesday morning, which was an ordinary Tuesday, which was exactly right because that was the kind of life they were building. One where the extraordinary happened on ordinary Tuesdays, in kitchens, without staging. She had the test in her hand and the careful, still expression, and he understood before she said anything. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Okay? Yes?" He crossed the kitchen. He looked at her face, the calculation running, the "what does this mean for everything" that was her particular brand of processing, and he took her free hand. "It's okay." We have a lot going on, she said. The new job is still, I know. And Lily is at an age where, Claire, he held her gaze. It's okay. We're going to figure it out. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't even seem scared, she said. I am, he said, but differently than I used to be. The scared I feel now is the kind that goes alongside things rather than instead of them. He paused. Lily scared me. Every Thursday for the first 2 months scared me. You scared me. You still do sometimes. He held her hand, and I kept showing up anyway. That's what different feels like. She looked at the test in her hand, then she looked up at him. Noah, she said. He blinked. What? If it's a boy. I've been thinking about Noah. She said it in the specific way she said things she'd been carrying for a while and had decided it was time to put down. I like the idea of a name that means something about water, given where we started. He thought about the rain, the storm, the reading light, the paper airplane that became a bird. Noah, he said, if it's a boy. And if it's a girl? She almost smiled. We'll argue about it. That's fair. She put the test on the counter, and he put his arms around her, and they stood in the kitchen of the house with the lopsided workbench in the yard, and the drawings on the refrigerator and the building set half finished in the living room from Sunday, and outside it was February, and cold, and the yard was brown and waiting for spring. He held his wife in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, and thought about the particular truth that no one tells you about the life you're supposed to want, that it doesn't arrive like something you planned. It arrives like a wrong turn in the rain. Like a child laughing at weather. Like a door you kept thinking was closed until the day you pushed on it and it opened. It arrives in the gaps between the things you were certain of. And if you're paying attention, if you've learned, even a little, to be in the room you're actually in rather than the one you're managing from a distance, you recognize it when it does. But that Noah was born the following October on a Thursday. This was not planned. It simply happened that way, as the important things tend to. Lily met her brother in the hospital room with the specific gravity of someone assuming a new responsibility. She was 4 now, and had opinions about everything with an increasingly sophisticated vocabulary for delivering them. She stood beside the hospital bed and looked at Noah with the same assessment she'd aimed at every new thing in her life. The reading light, the tortoiseshell cat at Birch, the man standing in the rain who became, by degrees, her father. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, He's small. He'll get bigger, Claire said. Lily considered this. Okay. She appeared to accept the developmental trajectory as reasonable. He can use my workbench when he's bigger. That's very generous, Adrian said. He can't touch rain, she added. Also reasonable, he said. Lily nodded, satisfied with the terms she'd established, and went to investigate the hospital room's window with the professional attention of someone scoping out a new territory. Adrian sat beside Claire's bed and held his son, who was asleep in the specific, absolute way of newborns, and thought about none of the things he usually thought about in hospitals. Not logistics, not what came next, not the management of the situation. He just sat with the weight of his son in his arms, and the sound of his daughter narrating the view from the window, and his wife beside him in the particular exhaustion of having done something enormous. And he was entirely in the room he was in. No part of him was somewhere else. That was the whole thing. That was the thing he'd been learning all year, in Thursday afternoons and hospital nights and kitchen arguments about cabinet colors and a badly built workbench that his daughter loved without reservation. The whole architecture of what he'd become came down to that, being entirely in the room he was in. It sounds simple. It isn't. It is the hardest thing he'd ever done. It required more from him than any deal he'd ever closed or any negotiation he'd ever won or any number that had ever appeared on any spreadsheet his father reviewed on any Monday morning. But it was the only work that mattered. 2 years after Noah was born, on a Saturday in late spring, they built the playhouse. It had been Lily's idea, which surprised no one. She had produced a drawing considerably more sophisticated than the refrigerator drawings of 2 years ago, recognizably architectural, and presented it at breakfast with the manner of someone submitting a proposal to a board. It needs to be yellow, she said. Why yellow? Claire asked. Because yellow is good in rain. Adrian looked at Claire. Claire looked at Adrian. Neither of them said anything to that. They built it over 2 weekends. Victor came both times. He was 75 now and moved differently than he had. More careful with steps, more deliberate. But he worked steadily and without complaint, following Lily's direction on the placement of the window. There had to be a window. She was very clear about this. And the color of the door, which after significant debate she settled on red, because red and yellow, she explained, were the correct combination, and this was simply a fact. They painted it on the second Sunday. All of them, even Noah, who was 2.5 and contributed primarily by sitting in the grass nearby and providing commentary in the confident tone of a person whose opinions were not yet fully linguistic but were nonetheless firm. When it was done, Lily stood in front of it. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at it the way she looked at things she'd decided mattered, with the full weight of her attention, the dark, serious eyes that were her grandfather's and her father's, and somehow entirely her own. Then she went inside it and closed the door. They waited. The door opened. She leaned out. "It's good," she said. "You can all come in." Victor looked at the door, which was sized for a child. He looked at Adrian. "You first," his father said. "It was your idea to come," Adrian said. "It was your daughter's idea to invite us." They both crouched through the door with the undignified maneuvering of tall men in small spaces. Inside, Lily was seated on the floor with Rain the rabbit, who had survived 4 years of intense custody and was showing the wear of it. One ear slightly bent, the movable joints a little looser than they'd been. The paint on his wooden nose faded. She had never replaced him. She had never asked for a new one. Noah followed them in, falling into his father's lap with the trust of someone who has never had to calculate whether the ground will hold. Adrian sat on the floor of the small yellow house his daughter had designed and his family had built over 2 imperfect Sundays, and looked at his father sitting across from him in a space that required him to keep his head slightly ducked, holding Rain the rabbit, looking at Lily with the specific expression of a man who spent a long time building the wrong things and arrived late, but not too late, at the one that mattered. Outside, Claire's voice. "Is there room for one more?" "Come in," Lily called. Claire crouched through the door and sat beside Adrian. He looked at her. She looked at him. The playhouse was full of Mercers, and the afternoon sun came through the window that Lily had insisted on, falling on the yellow walls in a way that made everything warmer than it was. "This," Lily announced, with the authority she'd been accumulating her whole life, "is our house." She meant the playhouse. She also, Adrian understood, meant something larger. Something that didn't have exact dimensions or a property value or a line in any document his father had ever slid across a mahogany desk. She meant, this is what we are. These people, in this space, with this history. She meant, I know who my people are. I checked every morning and they were there. She meant, this is the thing worth keeping. He put his arm around Claire. She leaned into him. Noah was examining Ran the rabbit with the focused attention of someone encountering an important figure for the first time. Victor watched his grandchildren with the expression of a man who had learned to be present by seeing what absence actually cost. Not an abstraction, not a professional liability, but a child handing you a rabbit and expecting you to hold it carefully. He held it carefully. Outside the yellow house with the red door, the yard was green and deep in the late afternoon light, and the street beyond it held the ordinary sounds of a Saturday in late spring. A lawnmower somewhere, a dog, children in the distance running a game whose rules were theirs entirely. Adrian sat in it, all of it. The ordinary and the hard-won and the beautiful and the still imperfect and the ongoing. The life he had nearly traded away for a version of success that fit on a spreadsheet. He had learned something this year that he suspected he would spend the rest of his life learning in new ways, because it was not a lesson you learned once and graduated from. It was more like a practice, more like the gap between the old impulse and the new choice, showing up every day, asking you to decide again. What he had learned was this: the things worth having are not the things you acquire. They are the things you tend. You show up for them when it is inconvenient and when you are tired and when the version of yourself that wants to be elsewhere is louder than the version that knows better. You show up and you stay and you hold the rabbit when someone hands it to you. You build the workbench even when the leg comes out crooked. You come back to the table even after you left it. You say true things even when the strategic version would serve you better. You choose presence like it is a choice, Because it is always a choice, made again every day. And the life that results from making that choice is not the life he had planned. It is better, harder and more specific, and full of spiral pasta and ear infections and arguments about cabinet colors and a workbench with one shimmied leg, and better. Not the legacy he had been built to want, the one worth keeping. He was still learning the difference. He expected he always would be. It turned out that was fine. It turned out that was the whole point.